What's up, everyone? Shane, aka Wild Poker here, coming back at you with another hand history review. And again, we're doing Mattis. Reason being is he won our subscriber-only league tournament twice in a row. The winner of the league each month gets a subscription to the stream gifted to them, and then also a hand history review. So the lucky winner, Mattis, again, getting a review. Here we go. And this is a 750 Bounty Hunters tournament. So we won't have the bounties again to talk about, which will make things a little more complicated. But we'll do our best talking in a lot of situations. I think there's still a lot of good that we can get from this without, knowing what the bounties were in each situation. Easy fold here. Folding here. And we're just going to try to go as quick as possible. I'm going to try to do at least one pile solver review, one card owner's EV, and then a bunch of hold'em resource calculators. So we'll get some good study materials involved here as well. This is a spot where I think squeezing is certainly reasonable, especially with a min open at these stack sizes from this position and a call here. I do tend to call a lot of hands that are reasonable squeezes here in the big blind just because we are closing the action. We're going to have good relative position post flop. We're not putting in a significant portion of our chips, without knowing what the flop is going to come with the strength of our hand and things like that. So let's say we call here and the flop is 4, 5, 6. We can easily fold and not have to worry about it. But that's kind of a minor concern when you have such a premium hand here and you do have a good squeeze opportunity. I think that both calling here and both squeezing are going to be profitable. And we'll see what happens here. He jams. I'm guessing this is a misclick, I would hope. I don't think ever just jamming here is going to be your best bet. Yeah, you're mostly just going to get folds and pick up the 4 big blinds, but you could still get the folds for an 11 big blind squeeze. And then also you can get some calls by hands that you dominate, like ace queen, ace jack suited, king queen suited, king jack suited, stuff like that are going to call, and then you could potentially try to get stacks in that way. I definitely don't think that jamming is our best option. And easy fold. Let's turn on the HUD as well, just because as we get hands on people, we'll actually be able to make some HUD-based reads. So we get a big raise here, easy fold, pocket nines. Just gonna call here. I'm gonna cut off versus a early position open. And checking back the flop. We're just trying to get the showdown here, I guess. Yeah, I don't even think there's much argument for block betting. I mean, these guys can both have a wide variety of weak aces that we're checking to see what this guy did. This guy could still have quite a bit of hands in his range that are stronger than our nines. Anything jacks, tens, queens, kings, aces. He can also have some slow played ace-sec type hands as well that are going for check calls in a big multi-way pot. I would reserve our bets here for quite a more polarized range. Any of our 2 pairs that we flopped, sets that we flopped, and then some of the good bluffs, like if we had 6-8 suited here or 8-9 suited, things like that. We do have the gut shot here. There are some bluffs on this guy's end with like some 8x hands. And this guy might be calling with some things like similar type hands as well. I think I would end up calling one here, but if any more money goes in without us improving, I think we're just going to be getting out of the way pretty quickly. And we fold. I mean, this isn't an ideal calling situation for nines anyways. It would be pretty thin, but I do think that there's going to be just barely enough stuff here between these two guys that our nines is doing well enough against with the extra gut shot equity to the what would probably be the nuts. And we can see like hands like this are perfect examples of things that he could be calling with that we could be ahead of. Obviously a very strong hand here, but I do think that there's going to be, definitely much weaker hands than this in his range here. So I would raise this hand in this spot. Looking only 9 hands, but a 6-7 22, definitely a sign of a recreational player. We would be opening this for sure had he not limped, and I think it's a good opportunity to just isolate the limper. Probably even just get folds and just pick up a 3.5 big blind pot. I'd make it something like 3.5 to 4 here. 3.5 seems pretty reasonable. Yeah, I think raising with this hand in this spot is going to be much better than just limping. You could limp some of your like king 2 suiteds and king 3 suiteds and things like that that have good flush opportunities but aren't very high card strong. I think this hand is just strong enough to just go in for a raise for value against a limping range here. And pretty good hand to bet. We can barrel any of our spades on the turn. Obviously, we have the gut shot to the nuts. I think this is a reasonable hand on this board to just start betting. And these guys are probably going to be very weak ranges given that it's a limp pot. This guy here can have some weak ace X that's playing this way, but I think mostly he's probably got a pretty weak range as well. So I would be down with just trying to bet here with the plan on barreling turn cards like this. Now that it's continuing to get checked to you on the turn, I think we kind of lost a lot of our fold equity prior, and we're actually gaining quite a bit of showdown value. This one's going to be a very hard one to model multi-way, otherwise I probably would, but my guess is at this point we're just going to try to take our showdown value and realize our equity for free here on the river. And I think I'm pretty cool with that check. But had we bet the flop, I would have certainly been betting this turn and expect to just take it down a lot that way. So this could be some 9x, some 6x, I guess, could be playing this way and betting now. I guess there could be some other pairs, like, I don't know, pocket 7s maybe. I think a lot of the 8s, 10s type stuff is going to be raising, so this is very rarely an ace when another spade comes off on this turn. I don't think, and many of the aces would be checking. I think they would all be trying to bet for protection. Jacks, most of the jacks I think could bet for protection. Maybe some of the weakest ones are still here. This guy is probably pretty darn weak at this point. Again, wide range to begin with and just kept checking all the way through. Almost worth considering bluff catching here. I mean, this is the big blind. He literally has a 100% hand range here. And not only that, but he's kind of capped because he didn't raise, so he doesn't have hands like ace-king, ace-jack, pocket jacks, pocket 9s are pretty unlikely. You know, he doesn't have a lot of the strongest hands in his range are removed, so this is 100% range, but all the weakest stuff mainly. So we have a pretty reasonable bluff catcher here if his range is that wide. I mean, it doesn't take, he only has to take a small fraction of just his random cards and turn it into a bluff here for this to be a profitable call, because you can see we only need to win a quarter of the time. And we already have a pretty good read. This guy just likely has a whole bunch of nothing. I would be actually pretty cool to see a call here. We end up folding. That's okay. I don't think it's, even though we're getting such a good price and there's the potential for the bluffs there, it's still not going to be like a slam dunk. We're just, winning all the money call. But I think it's probably going to be pretty close to winning about that 25% that we need. You can start min-raising your suited ace X's like this from under the gun if you're at a passive table that's not 3-betting, very actively. Basically, well, this guy's getting pretty active. But for the most part, you're at a really passive table. And I think you're deep enough where trying to play these suited aces, trying to make some flushes or some straights, or, even just getting to fold pre-flop, which will happen some of the time, I think is reasonable. I've been adding hands like this into my under-the-gun min-opening range more and more recently, unless I'm at just some insanely aggressive tables where people are shoving every other hand. Here, just going to call. It is okay to have these, your smaller pocket pairs, occasionally 3-bet in a squeeze spot like this. I would prefer to maybe have a little bit of a read that this guy is just very, very active on the button, is going to have a wide range. And then I would start adding these in a little bit more, but you can 3-bet these some of the time even without the read. It's nice for board coverage, and it gives your range a little bit more diversity, pre-flop and post-flop. I'm alright with just folding the 4s here. It's sandwiched in between. It's pretty unlikely that this guy has a hand that's ahead of us. But this guy betting this board into you that can have a lot of this stuff. You have a ton of things here that can defend and are stronger than the 4s. I think I would be cool with just folding. We do call. So if he's ever block betting here with like 7-8, which might be possible from kind of a recreational type player, occasionally making a couple bluff combos with missed flushes. I don't think a 9 really ever bets this size, so it's going to be like 6s, the 7-8, and then maybe some bluffs. Probably have to call here again versus this sizing, just because there's going to be some things that we're going to beat. Again, we only need to win 19% of the time. We're getting a really great price here. And he did have a 9, which is actually pretty surprising. I would note that. That sizing on the river. I think that many players would make it something quite a bit larger with their 9x hands and stick to a smaller sizing with like the 6-set, all the things that I mentioned before. So I think that's kind of noteworthy here. Maybe he doesn't always do this, but it's at least something that you could refer to later, that when you're trying to read hand ranges, you can say he might have some nuts, some combos of the nuts for those small bet sizings, so that's something that you can just be aware of for later. But again, I would have folded the turn, but once we get to the river that way and he's making that small of a bet, I'm definitely on board with the call. Ooh, pocket queens. Raising here, I like it. And our stack sizes, if we do want to play for stacks, we don't need big bets on all the streets to get it in. I mean, he's going to have some 8x in his range, but he's also going to have things like 9-10, a bunch of, Jack 10, Queen Jack, King Jack offsuit, who knows, with a 60-10, flush draws. I think I'm certainly betting here and certainly willing to play for stacks even on this board. I would start with probably something like a 3.5 big blind, 4 big blind bet on the flop. That seems reasonable as well. And he just folds. Bummer. But this is the guy that's been limping a bunch. He's opening here. I'm definitely down with a fold with the King 9. King 9 suited I would probably call versus a recreational player in position. Just because even though he's been limping and kind of passive with a bunch of his hands, typically guys of this kind of stats are, they don't have defined ranges. They just kind of go by the mood. Like, I want to raise this hand, I want to limp this hand. They're not really putting too much thought into it. So you'll be surprised with some of the stuff that shows up with a raise, even though they've always been limping. And King 9 suited in position is going to be doing, I think, well enough. I think we can call here. You don't have any. This guy's been playing, pretty reasonable it seems, but mostly just passive after you. So yeah, I would definitely call here versus the min open. You've got almost 30 big blinds, ace 4 suited. You're going to be in position again. All kinds of randomness is probably in the range here. I definitely think it's worth it. If you had like two of these guys were at like 20 big blinds and they were shoving really often, and things like that were happening, then yeah, we can make arguments for folding ace 4 here. But you don't really have that after you. So with these guys not being aggressive at all, I'm actually okay with trying to limp here on the button in position. You're getting a great price. It's very often just going to go call check, and you'll get to see a flop, and you'll have absolute position, so that's reasonable. But again, this isn't the greatest hand in the world. Calling, even with the price and everything, is still only going to be probably slightly winning. So You know, if you're feeling like maybe you'll end up making some mistakes post flop, then it's probably not worth making the call. If you feel like you'll be able to play pretty well against these guys post flop, then I think I would throw in the limp. I would just jam the ace-9 here. Very wide range is calling. And at your stack size, I think it's a very reasonable jam with the ace-9. Pick up the pot right now, you get to pick up 4 big blinds. It's a pretty nice add to your chip stack. And even if they do call, I mean, I think you're going to be doing quite well with this hand. I would almost consider betting here for value. I think you're well ahead of their ranges. But we scoop it up. Once we check the turn, I think just checking to get the showdown is fine. But on this turn, I think that putting out like 1 big blind bet, you know, hands like this might call you. Some of the weaker ace-x might call you that are in the range. You know, flush draws are going to call. So I would have definitely considered it at that point, but I would have also just jammed pre-flop. Going for that min open here. It's reasonable sizing, similar. And I'm just shutting down on this flop with 3 other players. Even versus 2 big blind bet, I mean, there's just not really any turns other than a king, a non-diamond king, that are very appealing to us. So even though it sucks folding to this kind of bet, I would just make the fold. So nice. So I guess we're shoving. Yep, perfectly reasonable shove. We get called by queen 6. Let's look at his call. So the blinds are 75, 150, which means that you have like 1,600 chips or something like that. And you have a min bounty on you, which is going to add another half of starting stack, whatever that is. If this is a bounty builder tournament, it's 5,000, so it added another 2,500 chips. So we'll just say you have 1,600 chips plus 2,500. So he's got to call 1,450 chips to win a pot of 44,100 when you include the implied odds of your bounty. So he needs 26% equity with his call here. And let's just say you're using, gotta pull up all this stuff, a little behind here. Let's just say you're using a push-fold chart. We'll give you that range. So basically 11 big blinds. On the button, it says you should be shoving something like this. So we'll plug all those hands in here. Pocket pairs, broadways, suited ace, offsuit ace. And let's say you're shoving like all the way, even these, you know, 0.04 plus EV hands and stuff like that, which I wouldn't recommend. I think you can not shove those until you get down to like 4 big blinds type stuff. Okay, and then we'll put queen 6 in. And boom, you can actually see that the queen 6 off is a call here at these stack depths for the bounty. It's actually a pretty winning call in the long run if you're shoving this range. So just something to keep in mind for your guys' future reference. I mean, once the stack sizes get pretty short and there's a bounty involved, it adds an insane amount of implied odds, which is why you see sometimes people making some crazy calls. When you get much, much later in the tournaments, bounties don't have anywhere near this kind of effect, but let's see how tight we would need you to be for this to not be a call. I mean, you can see here that we're getting very strong with our range, and he's still needing to call with queen 6. Why do I keep hitting the wrong button? So yeah, basically the moral of the story is here that there's no range that we're going to be able to shove here that I don't think it's a call. This might get us there. Okay. So basically it's all of our pairs at least dominate as 6. And we're getting it in, yeah, I mean, and that's definitely on a shoving range. So basically, if you guys see yourselves in this situation, about a 10, 11 big blind shoving stack, and, you know, he's got the 1,500 chips, 1,600 chips, and you've got the bounty up for grabs. We're going to be calling with, I think any queen is going to be a call there. So just something to keep in mind on how much the bounties affect your calling ranges when stacks get very short. But we get to hold and we double up, so sweet. Might be okay at this table. Again, we just have the situation where people are not playing aggressive pre-flop. You are running into a problem where you're getting stack sizes like this, though, that have a pretty big incentive to just start shoving pretty wide when they see 2 limps like this. But from this position, it's probably going to happen quite a bit less than like if he was up here or something like that. So at this table, I think I can actually be pretty cool with just calling here with Jack 8. We flop the double gutter. Let's just check and see what these guys do here. You're probably never getting a 9 to fold. But there might be some 5x that bet here this size that fold. There might be some 7x that bet this size here that fold. And this guy's just got a super weak range. I don't think we're very worried about him. Probably check jamming is going to be better here than check calling. We're going to put this one in CRAV and just kind of test out some ideas. But let's play the hand out and then we'll put it in CRV and kind of see. So we do call, he calls. We hit the gut shot. Here I would actually donk. We've got a very, very recreational player that's probably not even going to be aware that the straight is on the board and still continue to call with an 8 with 1 pair of hands. If we make it a small donk, and then he can call, and this guy can potentially, if he did have a set or something, could potentially raise, but at least he's going to call. Where there's a lot of stuff that bets this flop here, and his range just checks back. I think in the multi-way pot with the how do I want to say this? If the raiser was here and the recreational player was here, I would prefer a check, because then we can check, the raiser can bet, and then the recreational player can call. But now we don't get that option, because a lot of time what's going to go is check, check, and then he's just going to get to check back a bunch of his hands. But we can bet, and then this guy can call a bunch, and then this guy's getting good pricing and call his bunch. So that makes sense. If the roles were reversed where the recreational player was on the outside, acting after the guy that was the aggressor on the flop, probably checking is okay. But when we have this recreational player sandwiched, I would just donk out here. Something kind of small, like 6 big blinds, 5 big blinds, something like that. Just trying to get a little more money in the pot. We get the 9 on the river, and I would still stick with my block bet sizing on this river. Probably, I think we can get more value than this, though. Something like 5 big blinds, 5.5 big blinds seems pretty good to me. And we get jammed on. So this is pocket 5s, pocket 7s. I guess 9-7 could be possible, 9-6 could be possible. It's pretty tough. In a limp pot, when he can actually have all the combos of 2 pairs, it's going to be pretty tough. So let's run this one real quick in our equity. You can see here we need 26. I think we're doing just fine against this guy. I'm going to consider him a non-factor for the most part. So let's say he can have 9s, 5s, 7s, 6s. He can have 9-7, 9-6, 9-5 suited combos. Maybe just the 9-7 off. Probably these are getting a little more optimistic. I guess he could have like pocket 8s and a slow plate on the turn. 8-9 suited is also possible in that case. 8-7, 8-6, 8-9 off is possible. Something similar to this. If we ever have him, like, let's give him just one time where he just has a 9 and thinks that you can never have an 8 for this size and just decides to rip it in for value. So that'll be there, and then his one bluff will be like Jack-10 suited, blocking let's go 10. Let's go like 10-7 suited, blocking the nut draw here, the nut straight. Okay, so we put that in there. So you can see here we need 26% equity. Let's see if we end up there. We're ended up at a pretty reasonable clip, over 26% equity, with all the times that we split, and just a little bit of spaz in here with it. I wouldn't even consider the 10-7 spaz, but you know, one spaz here, just 2 combos, and 3 combos of bluffs, and with all the splits and stuff, we're pretty darn close. So I think a call here would be pretty reasonable. However, if you think that the guy is capable of having more, like let's say we throw in the 9-6 combos and the 9-5 offsuit combos, then we're just gonna be getting crushed here. So this guy kind of seems pretty tight over the 24 hands. I think some of those offsuit combos just aren't going to be there. So I just kind of think we're not getting enough of the nuts here for us to want to have to fold this hand when we pretty significantly under-rep the strength of our hand. And there definitely could be some bluffs here. So see what happens. We folded. Yeah, it's a pretty close spot and definitely a tough spot. But you can see there we're running right along. And a good enough equity where we could definitely make a call there. So let's pull up CREV, and I'll make the tree, and we'll look at the flop decision. Normally I build my trees and then bring it in, but I've been advocating CREV a lot on stream, and maybe there's some people that are using it that, you know, or maybe don't know how to use it, or people thinking about getting it that would like to do it. So we'll just walk through this one example. With me showing you like kind of the things that I do. The first thing you want to do, since our decision is on the flop, we want to just start the tree on the flop. It doesn't really matter like having these positions be exactly where they're at, as long as you have the relative positions accurate, meaning that the guy that was betting and raising is here, you're sandwiched in the middle, and you have your recreational player here. I mean, you could move the 3 over here, or any combination, it doesn't really matter, just making sure that everyone's in the right order. The next thing we're doing, if you set your blinds at 50-cent dollar, then you can go in here and just put in stacks of big blinds, and that makes things very nice and easy. Also, this one does have a tournament, some tournament functions if you wanted to do that and mess around with some ICM and stuff. Since we're not doing any ICM calculations, it doesn't really matter. We're just using the, we're just looking for the EV of a line. Make sure to add chips to the pot. So there were 6.7 big blinds in the pot. So we got everything set. Boom, let's hit that tree. So for us here, we want to set our hand at just the hand that we have. We're not worried about doing any range analysis for this case. So we got the Jack-8 of diamonds. The big blind for getting to the flop, it's probably going to have like, he's got a couple raises, so we'll leave these out of there. I don't know, he's got a 64% range, so it's kind of hard to know for sure, but something like this. Maybe these are also limping. I don't know, we'll give him something like this. Very, very wide player. And then the button guy was a little bit tighter. I don't think he's ever going to have any of these premium pairs. Even 9s is pretty unlikely. I think actually pocket 8s is somewhat unlikely, but we'll say that he can. We'll start here. This guy seems like a lot more of a reasonable player, so that's why we're not giving him a bunch of the stuff that could just easily raise. I don't know. Probably something similar to this. Maybe we'll throw in King 9. This looks pretty good to me. I'm going to stick with this range. It might not be 100% accurate. I mean, you're never going to get 100% accurate, but it seems kind of reasonable for someone to, you know, limp on the button after he's got 3 limpers before him. So yeah, keep in mind real quick here, this guy limped, you limped, this guy limped, he limped, this guy just checked. So the pot was actually a little more multi-way than I have it plugged in, but really he bets, these guys fold, so we're just worrying about who's remaining, which is why we have it down to 3. So he bets 3.35. So we check, check. And our options are raise or call. Flop is 957. We're just gonna have him bet like, so he's gonna be betting at least 1 pair. If I can find that word, there it is. At least a gut shot or more. And then anything that has like 2 overs and a better or equal to than a backdoor flush draw would be kind of his bluffs. And then just having folding everything else. It's kind of a simplification. Obviously, it would be checked, and there would be other lines to worry about, but we're only worried about what happens after he bets, not really worried about what happens after he checks, so we're just getting rid of all that stuff. Just running it to test it. So he's got a ton of 1 pair type stuff. Ton of gut shots here that could be betting. And 1 combo of 2 overs with a backdoor flush draw, so not really. I mean, this is just plenty hands that are betting. He's betting 74% of his range here. And you can see that we have 33% equity versus that range. And the big blind's range, or the guy in the middle. Let's also say that this guy we'll just have him fold some of his 2-pair because I think he might just bet some of those. So any of the 2-pair better. And then top pair. So let's see, how do we have him folding? Because I don't think that guy always checks with all of his really strong hands. So those things. And we'll say these can stick around like 50% of the time, so they're not always just folding. And since these are sets, I guess there could be some slow play here, so we'll say 50 for these as well. Okay. So we should see our equity go up a little bit. It did. Okay, cool. So now we kind of got things, ranges just kind of weeded out a little bit, trimmed down a little bit. So here's the option where we jam. The big blind's going to call with at least top pair. We'll say like ace-9 or better, and then all the 2 pairs and stuff. Could be wider. Oops. You can see it gets pretty big here. Worried that we might freeze out the thing here if we get too crazy with it. Okay, so we raise. He's going to call with at least, like I said, top pair, ace high, and then fold everything else. He's going to call. If he calls, then this range is going to get at least 2 pair, and then at least top pair plus a gut shot or more. And here at least top pair. We'll just say that. So you can see your EV here goes up to 5.59 big blinds, which is pretty nice with Jack 8. You're getting called only 4% of the time here, and then only if he calls 4%, you're getting called 9% of the time, even though they had quite a bit of strong things in their range. And obviously this is with these assumptions, right? He's calling with top pair or better, ace high. Maybe we can make that second kicker. We'll go down to third. We'll go down to the queen. But just mostly folding, and then you're still getting called a bunch here when this guy folds, and you're still only calling 32% of the time. So that makes a really good argument for jamming, even though their ranges have quite a bit of stuff that connect with it. Let's run this again, and your EV will drop just slightly here. I don't think it's going to change too much. Yeah, didn't really change at all. Okay, so that was if you jam. We will, now we're going to compare the option where you call three-handed. It's getting kind of tricky. Actually, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it because with three-handed, we're just going to make a giant tree and it's going to actually start to freeze out the system. But I think what we showed here is that we certainly have a pretty high EV line just by check jamming against ranges that are pretty wide. We're getting a lot of folds, which is very nice for us. And even when we do get called, our hand is just going to have a buttload of equity, given that we have the double gutter here. And one of the gutters is to the absolute nuts, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to go with just that check jamming would be the better option here, given that we have one guy that is just all kinds of randomness, and a guy here that could be limping on the button with some pretty red ranges, and it's definitely betting here and definitely has some folds after the fact. And there might even be some of the weaker 9x that folds, and if that's the case, then we're just really making a lot of money. In this case here, once the big blind folds, I have him calling with every single 9x. And I do think most guys will, but you never know. Maybe this guy can find some hero folds here. And if that's the case, we're just really, like I said, doing much, much better. So I think we made a pretty good argument just looking at those numbers. Even without comparing it to a call line, I think we can see that check jamming here would be pretty good for us. Normally, I always compare the lines. So you compare check down, you compare calling, and you compare raising. And I always try to compare at least those lines, and then sometimes I'll compare raising for different sizes, if it makes sense to have different sizings. But when it's three-handed, as you can see, the tree is just getting exponentially larger every time we add an action. And it would just be too hard to, we would have to just make so many assumptions going to the flop about how often people are, getting it in versus if we make a straight, or, how often they're folding if we keep betting, or or if we donk, all these kinds of things. And it would just, I think it would be impossible to be super accurate with. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. With this guy being pretty tight on the button, and we do have to worry about this guy a little bit, but this guy's just super passive. You could consider min opening the 10-8 here, and the goal would be just to play a pot in position against this guy. If you make a pair, you're just trying to play for stacks. Well, on some boards. And if you don't, then, maybe fire out a c-bet. If it doesn't work, give it up on some board textures, some ace-high and some king-high board textures. I think it's reasonable to go forward with him being pretty darn tight. The 9-10, I'm definitely min opening. I can fold to a jam here. We got 7 big blind, and yeah, this does complicate it a little bit. I still think we can get away with min opening here. One of the main things that just keeps coming up over and over is just how, in general, passive this table is, and how very little we've seen people jamming and shoving for the most part. Let's hold up our calculator here and plug it in and see what it says. Okay, so it shows that I made us under the gun. Basically, I just had those guys fold, and we get to min open hand. This is basically, just all the play post flop, and then we get to check it down with our equity and realize our equity. So in that case, you can see that 9-10 suited is just slightly negative EV. I think you can actually improve upon this number probably very slightly, just given the table dynamic that you have, but it's probably still going to be hard to overcome and tilt this into negative. So it actually turns out that this is going to be a fold here. So good to see. And I think the main thing that's probably hurting that is this guy. Let's look just a little bit more in detail at these numbers here. Like this guy's only 3-betting E5. Yeah, but this guy's playing like 100%, and then 3-betting you not all that often. Small blind's also calling a ton, which is not a dynamic you'd see with a 7 big blind small blind very often. But yeah, I just think it's going to be hard to a little bit. I think you can improve on the number because that calculation doesn't have any post flop play at all, and it's very likely that this guy's going to be making mistakes overcalling when you're value betting. And these guys, like this guy and this guy, are probably going to be folding way more than what those numbers say. So you can improve on it, but yeah, let's just go with a fold. I mean, you definitely, as we showed earlier, you definitely have a call here. So he's at 10 big blinds, 9. So he's got like a, or sorry, 8, 2,500, like a 17, like 1,800 stack, and at least has a mid bounty. So you can definitely see that the King 7 is going to be a call here. This guy's range is just really wide. Let's mess around with the calculator, three-handed, and see if we can get a call here. We're gonna try some new tricks with the calculator, see if we can't, or see a shove here, see what it would look like. All right, I don't know if this is gonna be a good tool for that, so let's go to this guy here. All right, so here it actually allows me to add in the ante. We just added as 2,500, which is, I'm guessing, half of what the starting stack was. This is a tournament where you start with 3,000 chips. It's going to be less, but we've got that factored in there. Okay, and then we'll use our chart to plug in our shoving range for him. Say here, we'll just say 8 big blinds on the button. Very, very wide range, so I'll just plug that in here. I'm getting rid of some of the absolute worst shoves here. And we'll get rid of this one. This one. Okay. So here's the shoving range. This guy calls. Let's say he has all the slow plays here, but like these aren't in there. And then it's like a bunch of stuff like this because he's kind of a recreational guy. I'm going to say that like most of the weak 8, well, let's put in a couple combos of weak ace X that don't just shove. So basically what I'm saying is like probably all these smaller pocket pairs just shove. Maybe sometimes you see guys like, we'll let these combos account for like the times he doesn't shove with those and he's planning on calling. I'm guessing most of these just shove. Maybe we'll give him some more of these. No. Sometimes that happens. Try it one more. We can't get it to work this time. We're just going to have to go old school. Do the math calculations. I don't know what it is, but it's crashing. That happens sometimes, and that's a bummer. Okay. So we're gonna get mathy. We're gonna go old school here. Get up my notepad, get up my calculator. Okay. Okay, guys. So we got super heavy with some calculations here. And I'll take you guys through step by step my thoughts and kind of what I put and explain the calculation. But if you guys want the cliff notes, the end of the story with my assumptions and everything, jamming this King 7 offsuit here is actually, this is pretty significant EV, but it's not really all that bad, which basically means that if we have a few different assumptions, then I think it'll actually become a positive. But at least we can show you guys the calculations that I did and how I did it. And if you want to study kind of some of these spots on your own, away from the table, because obviously you're never going to be able to do this at the table, then that would be, I think I would recommend it. Because this is something that I think I need to do more myself as well. You know, how wide should we be getting it in these spots for bounties? So let's go first step by step. So first thing up here at the very top, I have we're risking 34.08 to win 18.5 plus 10 big blinds. And where I got that from is for us to, once he calls, we're essentially risking his whole stack size minus our one big blind. So his whole stack size minus our one big blind is 34.08. That's our risk there. And the reward, once he calls, the pot size is 18.5. So we get that plus the potential reward of his bounty, which if it's at, his bounty is worth 2,500 chips. And the blinds, the big blind here is 250 chips, then it's 10 big blinds. So that's where I got the plus 10. So boom, you can see that here. The next thing I did was for the cutoff, I went into the push fold charts here for an 8 big blind stack in the cutoff, and I plugged in everything that was 0.1 or better. So we got rid of some of these weaker combos down here, and you can see that range plugged in here. And then I actually went quite pessimistic with this guy and said that he was limping all of this stuff, planning to call. And just to give you guys a visual of what that looks like, that's this kind of range here. Meaning that I think, you know, we might jam some of these at some time and you know, maybe some of this other stuff. But I think a lot of players are actually just going to jam like the king queens and, you know, kind of some of these ace x's and some of the ace queens and stuff like that. Definitely kings and aces will see slow played. Ace king will see slow played some of the time. Maybe there might be one more combos of like the fives and the sixes in here, but in general, I think this is a pretty pessimistic assumption for the range that he's just cold calling here and then planning on calling our shove. But anyways, I gave him something like this. And then we have our king 7, and so I plugged all these ranges in, and we got these equities here. The next thing I wanted to know is obviously how often we win if it's just us versus the cutoff, the original shoving range. So basically, same range up here in our cutoff, and we get these. The next thing I wanted to know is how often we win versus the big blind alone, and you'll see why later. So we got that in here. So the next step is how often are we getting folds, because that's important. We're obviously going to need some amount of folds and a pretty high frequency of folds for us to consider jamming here with the king 7 offsuit. And so I gave him this range to cold call, and then we kept the same calling range. So you can see here he's calling with a total of 498 combos. So let's copy this and we'll just put it in the thing here. Something like this, and again we have him like 4-bet jamming, you know, all of these stuff. But basically he's cold calling with a bunch of stuff around here, a bunch of kind of the weaker hands. And then when we jam, he's folding all the things that we didn't have up here. Which I think we could actually even make a wider, potentially a wider range with this guy, given, you know, what we've seen from him so far in this tournament. His stats, very loose passive player. I think he's definitely going to be calling quite a bit wider than he should against a guy like this, but without really having, you know, hard set data and things like that, we don't want to give ourselves super optimistic results. We want to kind of be pessimistic, and if our most pessimistic assumptions end up being profitable, then clearly something that's even just a little bit more optimistic is going to be profitable. So typically when I'm doing these calculations, I try to be a little pessimistic. And so I didn't, you know, put in some of these and some of these that I think could be there, and some more kings and maybe, you know, hands like this, stuff like that. And then again, we kept in all the, like, the slow plays and stuff. So that we have folding, and we needed to know the combos of his entire range, and then the combos of his calling range in order to calculate how often he folds versus how often he calls. 262 is his calling combos, so when we divide that, that's his percent calls here, and then we just take 100% minus that, and then we have how often he folds. So now we have basically built all the information that we could possibly need to do our EV calculation, and here's where it gets crazy. So first off, we have 0.74 and then a bunch of numbers here. So this is in relation to the small blind folding. You can see that's the same number here. So 47% of the time he's going to fold. And then now it just becomes us versus the cutoff shoving range. And so then we go up to here to this block. And you can see I use these numbers and not these numbers in this case. So I kind of made a small mistake that I'm just realizing now. But I don't think it's going to change it too drastically because the difference is we're splitting the pot. So I mean we're still getting at least half of it back. So it's only a small percent. So I don't think it's going to change it too drastically. We're not going to mess around with it. If you guys want to fix it on your own, I would go in and do that. So anyways, 38% of the time we win this here, which is the current pot plus his bounty. So we get this number. And then the other 61% of the time, we lose just 7.21 because all we're risking in this case against him is his 8.21 minus our, if this guy folds, we're just risking the additional 7.21. So our risk is much less the times that the big blind folds. So we have that in here. And it's important to note, if this step is negative, then there's no reason to continue with the calculation. So I would say if you get this far with your hand and it's negative, then just stop, and because there's no way that the rest of this here is going to be positive enough to make up for it. It actually should almost always be negative once this guy is calling, because you can see how strong the ranges were. So if we don't have a significant positive here, then you know your equation's done. You don't have to worry about all the other stuff. You've done your check basically. So I would just solve for this first before you spend a bunch of time doing, you know, all the other stuff. So the other time, 56% of the time, 52.6% of the time, that guy calls, and then we have all of this stuff happening. So what is this? The first one, and you can see here I actually took the right number. 24% of the time we win the entire pot. So we win both the 18.5, which is the pot, plus the bounty. And then we win the remainder of this guy's chips, which is the 27.88. So we already have this in here, so we also win the rest of these chips. So that's a sweet result for us. And the other thing that's going to happen is 39% of the time, player 2 is going to, and you can see I made a mistake again here. I only got it right once. But anyway, the result isn't super important. I'm showing you how to do it, and I don't think it's going to change this number all that much. The assumptions that we make with these ranges and other things is much more important than being off by a percent here. So anyways, this fraction, I mistakenly used this number instead of this number. This percent of the time, we're going to lose our 34.08 risk because the small blind wins the whole pot. And then the next time, 35% of the time, the player one is going to win. But when he wins, we can still win against the big blind range. So looks like again here we've got the wrong numbers, but it's very, very, very minor difference. So the times that this 35.41% is the times where the cutoff wins. 35% of the time, if the cutoff wins, our range is going to beat the big blind. So we end up winning the rest of his stack because we can't win the 8.71. And then the other percent of the time, we lose our whole stack because the cutoff wins and wins the main pot, and then this guy wins the side pot. So we've plugged all that in, and then here's our equation, and then we reduced it down to, I just started solving things to make it simpler. We get down to this, and then lastly we get down to our EV of negative 0.204. So you can see here that one, if this range isn't quite a slow play and doesn't call as much, boom, we're very quickly going to be actually in a plus EV shove. Or if we have just a slightly more percent EV hand, like probably even something like King 7 suited, if you guys want to try this out on your own, plugging King 7 suited here, or King 9 suited somewhere around there, I think is going to be starting to tip into the plus EV zone. So I would definitely play around with some hands and see if you can't knock it into the plus EV category. We actually made a mistake here. We should have, when this guy wins, we lose our 7.21 when this guy wins. There's nothing we can do about this one big blind. That's lost no matter what. So we actually lose 7.21 here. So it should be negative 7.21 plus, so I made a mistake. So 35% of the time the guy's going to win, so we're going to lose that 7.21, but then we're going to win back 27.88. And so now it's correct. I'm sorry. So once we go through and solve here, this number is actually just going to get even more negative. I'm not going to go through and do it all again. We'll just delete that. But this equation here is about as accurate as we're going to get for the multi-way pot situation that we have here, minus obviously some of the percents that I used the wrong thing. So mistakes abound, but I think we all still get the point. And my thing would be here is the wider this guy's range get and the less slow plays he have, I think we can actually get to become a plus EV jam here with a King 7. But it looks like most of the time, without just really having some really solid reads on what this guy's doing, we just have a pretty clear fold. So all that, and we end up showing up King 10, which doesn't really tell us too much because we definitely expected that to be in there. And Jack 8, we expected that one to be in there. So, okay, whole lot of math. Hopefully that helps you guys. At least you can do some of that away from the tables and get some practice in those multi-way pots for some reshoves. Well, this guy just got moved to the table. Well, the 12-hand sample has been pretty tight. These guys' ranges are very, very wide. We're getting a discounted price here to see the flop against players who are definitely going to be willing to pay us off for a lot of chips anytime we can make a hand here. So I think I would actually just call, put in the extra half a big blind, and see the flop in this spot. Similar thing here. Less appealing. This guy's definitely a stack size where he can be shoving quite a bit. I think it's definitely less appealing to limp here with this guy in the big blind. So I'm fine. I'm more fine with a fold here than with the last hand, even though this hand is stronger. Just call here. And like if this guy shoves and this guy gets all in, we'll probably be willing to get in with our 8s. I would I would just jam here. I think we're willing to get on with this guy. The pot is already super large. If we call, we're going to end up, we're putting in a third of our stack here with a hand that I think is pretty strong for the situation. And we're setting ourselves up to make some mistakes on a lot of flops where this guy can just jam like any ace high, any king high, any queen high flop and try to bluff you out of the pot against the bounty. I think there's definitely hands in here that are going to fold some of the time, and I think that against the majority of his range, we're doing quite well here with the 8. So I think a jam would be quite good here. And you guys can use the calculation. Put it up on the screen here if you want to try to follow it. I'll save this, so if anyone messages me and says they want it and wants to try to practice it on their own, going through these steps, then let me know and I can send it to you or post it in the comments or something like that. But I think we would have been pretty cool with a jam here. And you can see it, the range is just super wide. I would definitely 3-bet this guy somewhat small to isolate him. And if he jams, we're going to not be stoked about it, but I think we'd end up having a call versus him with the king-queen. But I would make it like 5.5 big blinds, 6 big blinds, just something. I think when he does call, we're getting pretty good value with our king-queen versus whatever his range is. And sometimes, everyone's just going to fold, and that's going to work too. But calling opens this up at a much higher frequency. Versus this guy here who's been tight, I think we'll just fold the king-queen offsuit. This hand looks familiar. And easy just call here. Nice flop. Given that we have the relative position here, I'm going to be donking a little bit less often. Yeah, let's just check and see what these guys do. Okay, gets checked around. We turn what is pretty much the nuts. I guess occasionally he could have checked back the ace of spades, but I think we're just super happy here. I'm going to start betting. Once this guy's checked back, I don't think this 4 flush board is the board where he's just going to all of a sudden be like, let's start bluffing a bunch, or let's start value betting super thin. I just don't think that's the opportunity here for this guy. So I definitely think we want to bet and just hope that this guy has a bunch of weaker flushes or even makes like some queen high hero calls, things like that, or pair queen. And I don't think the calling range is going to be all that different whether you bet like 2 big blinds here versus you betting 5 big blinds here. Because for the most part, they're just folding. So I would actually go a little bit larger and just, hope that you're kind of coolering this guy essentially. Yeah, checking. And I just don't think you're getting anything extra from checking here. And have to bet now. I would just pot it. Maybe this guy can call for thinking that you're just trying to bluff everyone off the split. And they fold anyways. Again, look for spots where, like, how much do you really think that betting, under half pot here, how many extra calls do you think you're getting for this size versus a pot size? Right? If you're betting 2 times this, that means they can call 2 times less, and you're still making the same amount of money. But I think that the calling range doesn't change that drastically versus a large bet. It's probably something like 1.5 times less calls, which actually means making the bigger bet, even though you're getting a slightly less amount of calls, is still more profitable long term. And if it's even less, like if it's only like, 30% less calls or something like that, then, we're just slam dunk making way more money with a bigger bet. So definitely look for opportunities and just think like, what is realistically their calling range here when I bet this size, and how much does it change when I go larger? And there's a lot of spots where it really just doesn't change hardly at all, and then in that case, we definitely just want to be going larger. And I think this is one of those. Because we probably just mostly expect folds anyways, right? So easy fold here. This is reasonable, given that you have everyone left at the table covered, and again, the theme that we've been saying over and over: not very many highly aggressive players. I would say, like, if you were at his effective stack size, this is just a fold. But when you got the rest of the table covered, and there's going to be some guys that can call, and maybe you can have some implied odds versus them as well, then it's reasonable. Ooh. So here, let's say they both have min antes. We're adding in like another 5k chips, or $16 big blinds, which means that we'll just say you're risking you're risking 18 for his stack. We'll just use the bigger number. So you actually only need 22% equity here to make a break-even call. So let's plug in some ranges. So range 1 will be this guy up here, which I think is going to have pretty darn strong range. I don't know, we'll do something like that. This guy here, I think, is going to have a similar range, but can be slightly wider, just because of his stack size. Or something like that. Yeah, and I mean, this is just barely plus EV. In MTTs, I don't think we want to take these very marginally plus EV calls, especially when it's a very significant portion of our chip stack. I would call with, like, let's put in Jack 10 suited here. I mean, this is definitely getting more into the realm of a hand that we're just going to have to call. Queen Jack suited here is going to be like a slam dunk. Maybe not as much as I thought. Let's try Ace 5. Okay, definitely not. Trying to just like touch around like all the kind of like the borderline hands. I mean, there's the obvious ones that everyone knows we're calling. Let's try King Jack, I guess, just slightly. So, I mean, getting 25% equity when you only need 22, I think seems pretty reasonable. But getting 23, I think we can just make the fold there. So, tens and ace queen. Both hands that we definitely expected to be in the ranges. But again, just there, I was just trying to highlight how much the bounties, especially when stack sizes are pretty short and the blinds are still pretty small, bounties have a pretty drastic effect on our calling ranges. But so far, I think we've made good folds when we had a bounty opportunity. Nice Felipe. This guy's been pretty active since he got here. We are short enough where I think we can, if we want to get the stacks in, we could try to do it over 2 streets. Pretty dry board, which I think that we're just expecting a ton of folds. This is a reasonable spot to slow play here against a guy. Like against this guy and against this guy, I would never slow play. We're just betting. Betting small, hoping that they can float with any random number of stuff. But against this guy, I think we can maybe try to check back and maybe do some bluffs or let him improve and get there. Wish he had King Jack. King Jack would be so much nicer, not blocking like a bunch of his ace-high combos that can call down here. But on the turn, I mean, we just got to start going for some value. So I bet like just under half pot, like 40% pot, something like that. And we're just hoping and praying that he's got some flush draw that decides to call here. You know, hands like King Queen, stuff like that decides to call here. We're just cooling the crap out of him. And he folds. And yeah, it's just a board texture where it's just really hard for you to get value with a lot of his range. Isolating for the bounty, very good, very, very good. Got it. Scooping him up. And easy fold. Easy call here. Good. Glad to see you calling. Nice hold. Man, this one's actually pretty darn close. So again, he's shoving 22 blinds, 2 400. Oops, wrong button. So his bounty's adding about 6.2 big blinds. And we'll go through the math. You are risking 21.88. So you actually only need 40% equity versus whatever his range is, not 46, so that's still affecting it pretty reasonably. And that's if he just has a min bounty. If he's got a double or more, then obviously it's going to get just less and less that we need. So here in the cutoff, let's use our chart. First off, the first thing you can do is if you have this maxvalue.com chart, you can go to the 20 big blinds, cutoff shoving. Obviously 910 is very, very negative over 20 big blinds, but that's without bounties. So now let's go home. 20, let's see what a cutoff shoving range looks like. And I actually think people are going to slow play aces some of the time, so we're not going to leave that in there all of the time. So we'll go 50%, aces and kings, and then we'll have the rest of the ranges be anything that's above probably 0.2. Just because at 20 big blinds, I don't think people want to be shoving all that often. So you can see here for min bounty, not a call. If we get into a double bounty or more, we're actually nearing a call here. And the more he starts slow playing aces, kings, queens, and ace king, instead of just jamming here, the more we want to call. But this guy's been pretty tight, so I think this is just a fine fold at the min bounty level. But again, just good to do this math and check these spots over and over. Here, I'm totally cool with just raising this guy and looking to get it in for his bounty, isolating him. And then maybe I would just make like a small 3-bet, make it like 5.5 in position. That's plenty at these stack sizes. Definitely not folding. I mean, calling is still going to be better here than folding. Yeah, he's been very passive and hasn't been raising much, but still, his ranges are just all over the place. Again, players like this are just doing all sorts of random things. You know, they don't have well thought out ranges. They don't have strategies. You know, they're just playing however they feel at the moment. So, trying to say that he's raising, this is only aces, kings, queens, or a super tight under the gun range, I just don't think is the way to go. So a little bit too tight of a fold there. I would think we would want to at least call. At these stack sizes, I think pocket sixes here is definitely strong enough to raise for value. This is not a stack size that's going for a lot of limp shoves. And I think sixes are definitely strong here, blind versus blind, especially versus limping range. So I would raise this for value. Something like 3.5 big blinds, 4 big blinds. Beautiful. And we get the fold, and that's totally okay with sixes. Just shoving here with the 8-10. Very nice to see. Did not pan out, but I'm happy to see that. Against such a small stack size, you know, isolating for the bounty is critical. Let's see what everyone's stack size are left to act. I can definitely get down with that. Totally okay with that. Probably going to call here and see a flop. Can't jam with this guy having you covered. I don't think we need to be putting hands like this into kind of a jamming range to isolate for a bounty, but we are getting a good price, and I don't think this range is. I think this range is going to be wider than what we would expect. So I would find a call. Let's see if we get a showdown. Just see. I mean, yeah, the hand had you dominated, but this just goes to show that I mean, there's definitely a lot of looser calls there. It's a bummer that this guy got so many chips now. He hasn't been aggressive hardly at all, so I think we can call here and play in position. I don't think we need a jam. Nice. That's a spot there. Let's go back here to the King 5. This is actually a really tough spot if this is a strong player or a maniac type player. Because I do think that you're going to get jammed on at a high frequency. Let's see if we can use... I don't think we can use a calculator to really solve this. It would actually end up just being a kind of an equation similar to this, where you have your EV of your call, and then he's going to fold, you know, the very bottom of his range. So sometimes you're going to call and this guy's going to fold, and it's just your EV versus him at that percent of the time when this guy folds. Then you're going to have to plug in another part where he jams, and then you're just folding and you lose your 4.76 big blinds. And then there's the part where he calls, and I guess you just assume it goes to check down and you get to run out, you get to do the EV of whatever his calling range is. So you could essentially do an EV calculation that way where, again, it's your EV of calling versus whatever you think this range is. Would be the first part of the equation. The next step would be you call and he 3-bets whatever percent of the time you think that is. So you just have to, you know, looking at how aggressive he is, look at his 3-bet range. That percent of the time you lose your 4.76, and then the next X percent of the time, you know, you call and he calls, and then you get to play out your equity post flop, and you just whatever that range is versus your range, and you plug that in. And that'll give you kind of a good guess. Obviously, some of the times post flop, because you have position, you'll be able to bluff or you'll be able to value bet well. So it'll end up being slightly better than whatever that EV equation turns out. But I guess that's how we would solve that. We would have to do some more mathy type stuff. I'm going to skip it for now because against this guy, I think it's just a very, very easy call. I don't want to have to make up a player type to do an equation. Right, meow, when we're in the middle of a long MTT review. Queen 10 suited, I would make an argument for calling. You've got 2 stacks covered here. You've got a pretty passive player here. We don't know much about this guy, but Queen 10 off, I think it's just fine folding. And also you got the opener covered, which is important. I'm guessing you're trying to go after this guy's bounty. I think it's probably a little optimistic when you've got a guy like this on the button. And now this guy has you covered and is going to be in position, and you've got another big stack here. Jack 8 suited, I think it's going to give you slightly more equity post flop for the times that it gets called. Jack 8 off, I think we can just find a fold here. Just going to check back this flop. Good check. I'm going to just try to get the showdown. That works out. I would consider betting some of my ace-x for value here at this point. I do have a lot of overpairs that actually check back this board texture just because we don't really have many 5s, and it's not really all that connected of a board texture where I think we're getting a ton of calls. So I would check back with those and then plan on calling down. the king jack, and then my bluffs would be, queen highs definitely could be bluffs. Jack highs could be bluffs. Getting some of those king highs and queen highs to fold. And then some of your very bottom of your range. Your king high actually has a reasonable amount of showdown, and I don't really think you're getting any better hands to ever fold here. And I don't think you're getting worse hands to call either for value. So this would be one that just kind of fits into like a check down, get the showdown type range. Maybe king queen folds here. But again, you don't have a diamond, so he's gonna, I guess a diamond isn't all that important on the turn anymore. It'd be more important on the flop. So maybe you'll get king queen to fold, but I think that hand just fits better in a check back and try to get the showdown range. Easy fold. And that's a reasonable reshove. Just going to call here. Give a chance for this guy to be in the pot. Just checking back this flop. We've got the best hand a lot. This guy can be going for some slow plays here for sure. He can be checking his aces. A lot of his ace-X. Planning to check call down. I think another hand where we just have enough showdown value in this pot and we can play it in position where we can just check back and get to the turn and try to improve. El Terrible turn for us. Easy check back. Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. He actually, like I said, he actually does have some ace-X with this line. Pocket kings is also a thing, but you block a king. What bluffs are there? Man, I don't know how many players are capable of just like check calling here with a similar hand like this, like king 10 of hearts, and then deciding to bluff jam the ace river. I think some players definitely could, but I don't know if there are many out there. There's also, I don't know, if he's doing this with king 10 and king jack type hands, which makes some sense, then I think we just have to call. But I think for most players, this is actually a spot where we could make a hero fold. Cool. I'm down with the fold there. Jam in the 9-7. Let's check our chart. I think this is actually going to be slightly too wide. Well, we do have a very short stack bounty here, so it's going to make it slightly better, but let's check. We'll just say 14 big blinds, mid position. Definitely, basically it's a break-even shove. Button, cutoff, hijack, button, it's over here. So it's negative. I don't think the presence of a small stack bounty there is going to make it any better for us, or enough better for it to go into the positive. So I think at 14 big blinds, we're shoving too wide there. Let's look at, yeah. I just think that's not going to cut it for us here. But we get the folds and it worked out, so we're still in the turn. Pocket tens, let's go, get it all in. Whew, nice run out. Didn't even need it. Ah, because of him. Okay, I'm cool. Definitely going to be bluffing this board when it gets checked to us and we only have 5 high. Probably bet something like 40% pot. A little bit too small because now I think he gets to float with all of his ace-X, most of his king-X, hands like 8-9, stuff like that as well. Get to float for sure. But we do get the fold and it works out, so sweet. Easy. I think we can just check back here. Pretty wide range on this guy's point, and we only need one bet to really get stacks in, so just check back and let him put it in for us on the turn. When he checks again, we could go for one more. I feel like a lot of his tens probably just jam here. If he has a hand like king queen, it probably just jams here after we check back. Obviously, I think like ace king and ace queen are just not a thing here. So checking and letting him in a pair, or letting something come on that he could potentially turn into a bluff, I think is reasonable. So I would check one more time. Check. So now we just have to jam. Doesn't work out, but I think that works out. That was a reasonable line against that guy for sure. Be willing to get it in versus any of these guys here for this guy's bounty. They all fold though, make it easy on you. Nice. I kind of expected this person, who's been pretty active, to have gone after that bounty, but they must have just had a very bottom of their range hand, which is going to happen sometimes. Going to call here. Queen 3 offsuit, I would fold, by the way. Okay. I'm perfectly fine with folding the 6-7 offsuit here in a small blind. Good fold. Even though we're getting a good price. There's not really any bounty incentive to be involved in that pot, or a recreational player incentive, it doesn't seem like. So we're short enough here that I don't think we need to be going for the sizing. I would just stick with your 2.15 standard open and make sure you're not like having some kind of bet sizing tells by all of a sudden going larger. Not enough hands for us to really think that this guy's all like this tight for sure. Definitely a hand at the effective stack size with ace-jack suited that you're willing to get it all in, so you could consider 3-betting and calling it off, especially when there's not any short stacks here that you're trying to give a good opportunity to rejam or something like that. I think this would be like kind of my cutoff for basically 23 big blinds effective to just get it all in. Beautiful flop. Just going to check here. We have a lot of things in our cold calling range here that just don't want to bet, so. What bluffs do we have here? Hands like King 10 suited, King Jack of hearts. I mean, we just have a couple heart draws. Maybe some of our Queen highs might decide they want to bluff as well, like the similar Queen 10 suited that even don't have the heart draw. I don't know. I think we just got to bet here. We only have 16 hands on this guy. I mean, he looks aggressive, but I don't know if there's going to be many guys that are aggressive enough for us to want to just keep checking on this board. Let's get in some chips. And everyone folds. I wonder if this is a spot here where actually smaller bet does get like enough more calls. I think people can make a reasonable number of king high hero calls here. Any of the pairs like 10s, jacks, queens, kings that got here this way are always calling, probably regardless of the size. I think the size is fine. I'm down with that. I'm glad that we 3-bet here. Definitely 3-bet anyone to call it off. The sizing, I think, is actually just about perfect. We're all in, and we get a fold. That's awesome. Good result. And just gonna call here. And probably gonna check call one on the flop. I think there's plenty of stuff that we could be ahead of that's just betting here just to take it down. This guy's got a very weak, very wide range, so for now we're not too worried about it. We're getting a good price to C1. And this is also a board texture that when we call here with the guy left act, if he's paying attention at all, I think it's going to be hard for him to continue to bluff, so it's reasonable that we're going to get some, cheap showdowns after we call. And you can see here he was just kind of full of poop, but this guy woke up with something. But I think a call there would have been plus EV. It's a little bit too tight with this guy being so tight so far. I think we need to min open this here. 2.15x open, do your standard. Easy fold. In this position here, I just fold the twos. We don't have this guy covered. We don't have a stack size where we're getting a high amount of implied odds. I'm just fine with the fold there. Top pair on the flop. I'm definitely going to be betting on this board texture. We do need some protection. I think this guy's range is going to be kind of wide given the stack size left after him. And, I mean, yeah, he's been kind of aggressive, but again, we don't know how much he's going to be bluffing on the flop, so let's just put in the bet now and protect our hand, and then hopefully isolate some of these shorter stack guys. So we do bet, good. Okay, now that these guys are out of the pot, and you could be perceived as having kind of a wide range to trying to attack these guys here, I think this is a reasonable turn to go for a check raise. He'll probably bet the Queen 10, Jack 10 hands for value for it. He might even bet some of his 9x hands. He's definitely going to have some bluffs that could consider betting here, like you know, Queen Jack, King Queen, turn spades, maybe even just pure floats that could bluff for us. This might be a good opportunity to go for a check jam. It just kind of looks like once these guys are out of the pot, you're just kind of giving up. A lot of times when you check here, when the short stack bounties are gone. So we do check. He puts out a $7 bet. I'm cool with actually check calling or check jamming here because even if you call, there's going to be 31 in the pot, and he's setting up for a jam on the river. So I think he could still rip in a bunch of bluffs. But again, you do need some protection. He has to be bluffing the river at a pretty high frequency for just calling here to be better than just check jamming it all in, given how much money's in the pot. So that's going to be kind of assumptions on you, like how often you're getting bluffs on the river. And like I said, it does need to be a pretty high frequency of bluffs when he whiffs to jam to make up for just protecting your hand right now. So you're going to have to make that assumption. Looks like you thought that he's going to have a pretty high frequency of bluffs, so you're going for the old river check call. It gets checked back. And yeah, exactly. Like this kind of hand, of you know, these hands are checking back when they miss, you might as well just get it all in on the turn. It's going to increase your EV quite a bit and reduce his EV quite a bit, because this hand might call the check jam some of the time, you know, given that when you jam, let's go back to the turn here. So there's 31 in the pot. When you jam, there's going to be 50, like 53 in the pot, and he only has 20 to call plus your bounty. Hand might just make a hero call there. And you could have, you know, stacked him in that spot and denied him some of the EV of his line by betting here and getting to see the river for just the $7. So keep that in mind. I would note that he checked back the Queen Jack here. I think not necessarily saying the Queen Jack is check back is good or bad, but some players would like always bluff this on the river, and those type of players it makes a little more sense to go for the check call and then go for the hero check call on the river. Against guys that are checking his back, we just want to always be check jamming in turn. So keep that in mind. Easy call here, okay. And then just check folding the flop, even versus a third pot. When he's betting into this many players, I mean, our ace-9, we're just not making ace-high floats here. Even if this guy hadn't raised, I would be folding. Gonna call here, though. This price is just way too good. Do we ever want to turn our hand into a bluff here to try to get like a 8x to fold? Probably not. I think we have just enough showdown value here. Unfortunate. What is up with this? Against this guy, well, I don't think we learned too much from the 4-5 suited hand that he had before. Probably going to call, given that we have absolute position here. And we're just getting an insane price. if I was here, I would always fold the 7s in this spot with 2 guys left to act. But I think here we can call with all of our 1 pair hands at least once, see the turn, make some decisions because we're going to have the position. The price is just too good here for that size bet. I like folding those lower suited connectors from under the gun. Depending on your table dynamics, you can start opening some of them. But I think in most table conditions, we're just folding. This is, I guess with his stack size, it's reasonable. The one thing that I've done, one problem I've run into a bunch is, like, technically this should basically put him in a push-fold spot. At this sizing, I mean, putting in over a third of a stack. Pre-flop, I mean, he might as well just get it all in a lot of the time. But what I've seen a lot of players do is just take their price and call here. And that's kind of devastating for you because we really want to try to get this in pre-flop. So I would go slightly larger. If we make it 9, he goes all in, and he decides to call, we can still jam. And it just prevents us from kind of the weird scenario where he calls, and then we get the ace high flop and are kind of left in a what do you do situation. And he folds, which is weird. There could be some ace kings here. There could be some aces here. I don't think there's ever jacks. We block king queen pretty heavily. I guess king jack suited is a thing, but there's 2 combos of that. There's probably a lot of combos of ace king though. I do think at his stack size, I mean, people would consider slow playing it to try to get someone to isolate the short stack bounty. Probably not all of them. Probably not 100% of the ace kings, but definitely some of them. All that being said, though, I still think our hand is too strong and the pot's too big. Versus, you know, I think there's, although I listed a bunch of stuff that beats us, there's still a bunch of stuff that we're ahead of. So the option is, what's the best way to play this hand to maximize our EV? And I think he's looked pretty aggressive over the sample. Probably just checking and letting him bluff when on a board texture where we really just don't need all that much protection. I think is going to be our best option, other than betting. Like the next best option would be block betting something really small here, like, you know, quarter pot or somewhere around there. I think if we're going to block bet, this is probably a little bit too big. It's pretty darn close. And he folds, and that's fine. But, I mean, only 26 hands, but so far he's been quite aggressive. And again, we don't need much protection on this board, so maybe going for some check calls might have been a pretty cool line against this specific player. Also, if we block bet and he jams, I think we're still going to end up calling. If there's ever hands like ace-10 suited that side in there because you're betting so small, or even he's just like, oh, we're short, I've got, you know, I've got jack-10 here, I've got a pair and some outs, and I just want to get it in to protect my hand. You know, we don't need all that many of those kinds of things before it just becomes a very, very plus EV call given the size of the pot and the stack sizes. So if I am block betting there, I am planning on calling off against this player. But I do think that checking just gets the range, make the range even wider when he's betting, so could help us there. Here, I think we could definitely consider calling, being somewhat deep and, you know, having a multi-way pot going. The only stack that really wants to shove here is maybe this guy. So I would have considered calling here with a 6-7 suited. Avoided a disaster of a 3-bet and then a 4-bet. You make sure we're not having. You can probably get away with it at the smaller stakes, and you know, this being probably a very large field, $7.50 tournament. I think having bet sizing tells isn't really gonna deter you too much. But if you're playing small fields against players that you're constantly seeing, you know, a field that's gonna have a lot of stronger regulars, we want to be careful not to have a bunch of different, you know, increase our bet sizing just for, you know, the really strong hands in our range. But it could just be that when you get close to 40 big blinds, that's your standard bet sizing. And if that's the case, then that's totally fine. Fine with a call here. Goes check, check, and we're going to be donking on the turn. A little bit too small. Again, I mean, the things that are calling here are probably still calling for a $4 bet, a 4 big blind bet, about the same frequency as a 250. And I think if you're bluffing here, you're going to be wanting to bet larger with a lot of your bluffs. Some of your bluffs are going to have overbets, and I think some of your 2 pairs and things like this are going to overbet this turn, and your weak flushes. But this, I don't know, is a hand that we want to fit into that overbetting range, although it's probably pretty close. But I definitely think we want bigger than 2.5 here. Queen on the river. And still going to be betting. Probably somewhere right around half pot. Maybe just slightly under half pot. And I think we do need a check call here at this pricing. I guess if he had ripped in a pot size bet, we could consider some folds, but even there with the ace jack here, I don't think we can fold. He's ace king, it worked out nicely. Against unknowns, this becomes really tough. I'm actually okay with just folding the 7s here. You know, with having this guy left to act and the original opener left to act. So that's cool. I think at these stack sizes, I'm mostly just calling the jacks here out of position, especially getting a good price. We're going to actually be calling here out with a lot of our opening range for this size 3-bet. I think jacks is pretty good. I like to call. Goes check, check on the flop. Turn. Still probably check again. I think there's a reasonable amount of times where there's going to be some delayed c-bets in the range here. And also some slow plays and things like that on his part, and then also hands like kings and queens that check back here. And with the ace already on the board, we don't really need all that much protection here, so I would check again. We do check call. Checking. Let's see what he bets. This is probably just too small. I mean, again, we only need to win 22% of the time here. If this is ever some bluffs or even like pocket 10s, you know, going for some super thin value here. We just don't need all that much random stuff here for us to need to call with the jacks here. So I'm just never going to fold to this size bet. And we do end up folding. I mean, again, like let's say he has all the ace kings. Let's say he can bet kings, queens, jacks, 10s. So he has a ton of value. Let's say he has ace queen suited as well. Let's give him like the king queen suited that's occasionally bluffing. We got the 10s that are valuing themselves. So we'll just have that range. And then we have our pocket jacks. You can see with that we're at 25% equity, and that's only 4 combos of bluffs and then 6 combos of hands that are valuing itself. So let's go something like, it doesn't really matter. So this would be, since we have pocket jacks, this would be 2 combos because it's queen jack suited, so this would be quite a bit less. So we kind of need, it looks like we need about 6 and 4. Looks like we probably need somewhere around 10 combos of things that we're beating. Let's test here. Well, let's do this. This would be 8 combos. So 9 combos of things that we're beating. And this means that he's always slow played all of his ace X here that got there. And is value betting kings and queens at this size 100% of the time as well. Which I think there's going to be some less of those. So maybe 1 less combo of bluffs is all that's needed. I think I would have probably found a hero call here on the river. Had he bet larger, I think we can just find a fold, because you can see, I mean, we're just not quite getting... It was a little bit difficult to get above 22% equity, and I think if he starts betting half pot, where we're needing 25% equity, or, you know, larger, where we're needing up to 30% equity or more, then I think we're just not going to get there with the jacks. Here with our pocket tens at 30 big blinds, we're certainly willing to 3-bet and just get it all in. Trying to look behind and see if there's any stack sizes that are super potentially going to shove behind us that we can consider just calling. And there's not, so I think we're just 3-betting our tens here. I guess calling's okay some of the time too. As our stack size gets shorter and shorter, like at 100 big blinds, I would not be 3-betting the pocket tens here. But as we get down to like 30 big blinds, 20 big blinds, I think we're just definitely willing to play for stacks more often. He checks. I think I would be betting a little more polarized here on this board. This is a board where we don't have hardly any bluffs at all. But we're going to have some like king queen that called here, and sometimes our ace king offsuit called here. So I mean, those hands I think do want to start betting for value, so we will be able to find some bluffs with hands like maybe I don't even know. I'm having a hard time finding bluffs. I don't know. We'll need to find some bluffs somewhere, but the moral of the story is we just don't have hardly any bluffs at all, which means that going this thin for value with pocket tens isn't super exciting. The more bluffs we can have, you know, the wider we need to go for value. Given that we're betting a third pot and we're kind of just betting for protection, and, you know, against a lot of his ace highs and queen highs and things like that, it's probably okay when we're betting this small, but I think in general we could just check back here and play the pot in position. And we get this turn, and he's donking out into us. Really weird spot. I mean, it's hard to say. Like, we could say, oh, our small bet on the flop kind of induced a weird, tricky line like this, which I guess is possible, but I think it's more likely that he just had a strong under-the-gun opening range, was kind of slow playing, and decided to now donk it. I don't think this is a turn that really increases his bluff frequency all that much. Like, can't imagine what hands want to check call here, and then just this 5 is like, oh, got a bluff. So it's kind of a very weird donk by him, and it's really hard for me to read really what's going on. So I would just default to the fact that he's under the gun range and is going to have, you know, definitely a lot of slow plays on this kind of board texture, given that he doesn't need really to bet for protection and can try to induce something from you. And it's definitely, because of that, it's going to have a lot of king X in his range here, getting to the turn. So I would just make a kind of a hero fold here. But we do make the call, and we get another small bet. Yeah, in order for him to make a call here, he needs to be doing this with like hands like ace-9 that opened here, hands like, you know, 9-10, 8-9 that opened here. You know, we need some ace-queens to be taking this line, things like that. I don't know. It's just such a weird line. It's really hard for me to nail down kind of what's going on. So again, I'm just defaulting to the fact that he's under the gun. And this board texture can have a lot of slow plays, and I would still just find a fold here on the river as well, if we got to the river. But I think I could end up just folding the turn, despite having what seems like a very, very strong hand. Because again, we have, like I said, we have a bunch of ace-kings there. We have a bunch of king-queens there. We have many, you know, stronger hands that could continue to call. I think we could have avoided the situation just by checking back and calling the turn and then evaluating the river. I like the open. I'm going to be calling here. We're so short. But still, we only need 26% equity. It's 4 or 3. Man, it's such a small. I think I would call here. We're just getting such a good price, and being willing to get in if we flop a pair. this could be a wider range of probably what we're expecting just because our stack is so short and his stack is so large. He could be making a small 3-bet to isolate us. I do think there's definitely strong hands here too, but I would end up calling here with the 8-10 suited for such a small 3-bet. I think going all in here is fine as well, but let's plug it in the calculator and double check. I don't know if we have any ICM going on yet. Again, I don't know when we get into the money and things like that, so I'm just going to do everything no ICM, and then obviously you guys can assume that if there is ICM involved, we're playing tighter. So make your assumptions from that. All right, here. So he's raising under the gun. Let's look at the range that it's giving him. Obviously, I think that most people aren't opening these kind of stuff. Something like this. Maybe some players will be wider. We're not quite sure here. Let's recalculate that real quick. And our jamming range here, pocket sevens is not plus EV enough for me to want to jam. I think I would even consider folding pocket eights and not taking a 0.2 plus EV, just because some of these ranges I don't think are going to be accurate. Once we get it all in with our bounties, I think there's going to be some people here that are going to be calling wider. And I definitely think this calling range is probably, if he opens sevens, I think it's going to include those, which is going to hurt us a little bit. And also, like I said, this range might be tighter than what I have here, and if that's the case, then obviously sevens just gets even worse. So definitely going to be folding here with the pocket sevens. Calling is close. I think calling is much more reasonable than jamming, so I can get on board with that. And we get this board texture. Probably just willing to raise and get it in now. And if we do check, we're just getting a showdown. We beat the fives. I mean, yeah, protecting our hand on this board texture when there's already so there's 11 in the pot, we only have 19 behind, and there's a ton of, you know, ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, king queen, queen jack, you know, all those kinds of things are in his range here. I don't know if they're always all betting, but probably betting a pretty high frequency on this board. And not, I think he's got probably the perceived range advantage in this board texture versus your guys' calling ranges. So I think this bet size could be all of those type of hands. And protecting yourself, I think, is pretty important. And here, once you just call, I think if he doesn't 3-bet, I think him having 10s plus is somewhat unlikely. So we're not super worried about his range. So yeah, I would just 3-bet and get it all in on this flop. Protect your hand versus all those overcards. It's nice when it works out like this, though. Here I'm just comfortable with just folding. First a half pot bet on a board that's going to be very hard for you to get to showdown with even a pair. Yeah, I mean, having a pair on this board, you are very, very likely to have 25% equity right now. So while it might look like a plus EV call, I think this is just a texture where there's so many runouts where he gets to bet the turn and you just fold 100% of the time. I mean, even this is like one of the best turn cards for you, just because it doesn't really change anything, and we're still having to fold here. So, yeah, I would just probably fold the flop versus a half pot. Versus a third pot or something smaller, I think we could definitely call. Min open, jam the ace-9, that seems super reasonable. Jam in here. Nice. Easy. I think 9s is a little bit too good of a hand to fold here. Yeah, he's been tied over 71 hands, but let's just assume bounties aren't even involved here. So we need 39% equity. Let's pop up our equity calculator again. Handy dandy equity calculator. So we're certainly still jamming with I mean, this would probably be about the tightest range that we would give someone at this stack size. And you can imagine Ace Jack and Ace 10 also being included. And we're at 37%, and this is without, obviously with the math of the bounties, that these, as the blinds get bigger and bigger, the bounties, like I said, have less and less of an effect. So, like if he has one bounty, it adds basically half a big blind, so it's essentially not changing the equation. If he has two, it's about a big blind. So he has to have quite a bit of bounties for it to really change the equation. But again, even the tightest range that we could give him ends up being very, very close. We start adding in like these. And you can see we're just moving in much more closer to slam dunk territory. Let's take out 8s. Not be as optimistic. So it's pretty darn close. I mean, pretty darn close. I guess if you were to look at his stats over 71 hands and think that he's just shoving like a very, very tight range, it's actually much closer than I thought, and I'm cool with a fold unless he's got like, he would probably need about 4 bounties before it starts actually reducing the percent enough to where I think it's going to be significant. 4 bounties would be a 2 big blind difference, so it would change it slightly here. So actually looking at the numbers, I think this is actually pretty strong fold, and one that I don't think I would have made in game. So good job, you man. Probably reasonable to go for a small check raise here. I think this board is quite a bit better for you with you having. At your stack size, I don't think you're jamming pocket 6s or pocket 5s. You might 3-bet pocket 9s, but a lot of people don't. So you could have 2 pairs here. You could have straights. You could have sets. You got a good gut shot. I might go for a little check raise here. Make it like 7. So if it goes check, check here, we need to make sure we're betting the river. He bets. And now we just have to fold. We're under the gun +1 open. I don't think ace 10 offsuit gets put into our jam range here. Ace 10 suited, I am positive does. Let's double check everything though. It's always good to use our handy dandy study tools that we have. So we're knowing that we're being as accurate as we can. All right, here. Let's check the range. Again, wider than what we would expect. So let's again, ace 10 suited is actually barely plus EV. I think we could just actually avoid even the ace 10 suited here at this stack depth. So ace queen plus, something like pocket 7s plus. Ace jack, king queen suited plus, something like that. So pretty darn tight range actually here. And actually even ace 10 suited, I would be able to find a fold if I had these numbers readily available. So, good fold. Again, you only need 26% equity. Queen jack off here, I think we can actually just make the call. Calling and check folding a flop doesn't really affect your tournament chip stack position all that much, given that you're already pretty short, but you do have a chance to double up if you do call. If you flop something with reasonable equity, you're just going to get it in. So if you're getting a great price like this, I think when we're our queen jack here and stuff, it's just pretty easy call. We hold, nice. I tend to almost never open 2.5x against the big blind unless it's kind of exploitatively. You're just giving him a really good price with your whatever you're opening here to just call really wide and play in position against you. I guess at like 20 big blinds or really shallow stacks, doing this with a strong range is fine. You don't really care about giving a good price because it's hard to make a mistake when you're so short. But now that you're up to 30 big blinds, I think we should just go for 3x, even 3.5x. Or I prefer to raise here with kind of a polarized range and then limp with a bunch of the middle stuff because we don't want to be going for limp shoves very often. So it would be better to raise and jam or raise call. He just folds, so that's a bummer. But hopefully that makes sense. I think a little bit bigger bet sizing is a little more is ideal. He's king. And I don't know what's up with all these really small sizes, but there's already 10 big blinds in the pot. You've got 30 big blinds. I think we're still just happy to get in with ace king. Everyone folds. Beautiful. I think you can definitely see that larger on this board. Having jacks does block a lot of his draws that continue, especially when you have the jack of hearts. But still, this is a board that's very, 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 very dynamic. I think the things that are calling here, again, this is a spot where the things that are calling for 2.54 are probably calling for 5 or even 6. So unless we were thinking that this is inducing a bunch of check raises, this is a board texture where I'm just mostly betting a pretty polarized range and either trying to get it in or looking to give up on later streets. We turn what I think would be the nuts. So now we're looking at our stack size, we're looking at the pot. What size do we need to get in to have like a natural jam on the river? If we bet something like 7, that put an additional 14 in. So that'll be 25, and we'll have 28 left. So we need like a bet of like 8.5 now in order to have like an under pot size bet on the turn or on the river. So something pretty sizable. I don't think we want to slow play here. I mean, we want to play for stacks, right? The only way to really guarantee that without knowing that this guy's going to go crazy on a bunch of rivers is to bet the turn. If we were shallower, let's say we had like 15 big blinds remaining and it's not much of an overbet on the river, then yeah, check back, maybe do some bluffs, things like that is more reasonable. But at this stack size, we need to be really putting in the chips. He bets 7. And now on this river, I don't even think you can jam. There's better hands than you now in his range, and I think a lot of his 2 pairs type stuff have pretty easy folds. So I think we just have to call here. Interesting bet by him on the river. It's actually reasonable. I mean, considering turning some of his pairs into a bluff, so it's not like crazy, but I think that's one of the ones that has a little bit more showdown value. So we're continuing to stick with a 2.5. The other time I'll use 2.5, one of the exploitative times that I use it is against guys who just look like they're playing way tighter than they should be. Then we might as well just give ourselves a good price and just try to get a bunch of folds. Maybe this is the guy, but we don't really have enough hands to know that, but it's worked twice, so maybe I'll just stick with it then at this point, now that I've seen it work twice. I think this is a pretty good size. 3-bet. That is a straight. I like the c-bet sizing. Again, smaller works here because the pot's already so big relative to the stack sizes that you can bet small here and still get stack sizes in the river. If the pot was much smaller and we had these stack sizes, we would just need to bet larger. So let's say the pot was 6. I would still want to bet this size on the flop to build the pot as quickly as possible. And again, the things that are calling and folding really don't change all that much. So we can go with something like 6 or 7 again on the turn. This is also a fine option as well, just getting it on the turn. Ace Queen, we got him. Hopefully a big old bounty there. This actually starts to become okay when you're getting, 70 plus big blinds deep effective with the table, but you still have a lot of guys that are somewhat short, playing ace 10 and getting it in versus this guy if you flop an ace or top pair tens or something, I think is pretty reasonable. This guy as well, these guys as well at these stack sizes. You do have to be a little bit concerned, about this guy and this guy, but I guess it's close with this guy being in position on you. Gonna be calling here. Again, we got both of the guys covered. We're getting a good price. We've got a hand that does have some, implied odds as well. We get to close the action. We have relative position post flop, so we'll get to see what these guys do. 2-7 suited, I think would be a fold. 3-7 suited, where we have some connectivity as well. I think we can make the call. I guess over the sample, this guy's been tight, and we got. I would call with like King 8 suited here and play in position, given that we have him covered. I guess we can just fold the King 8 off. All right, we need to keep an eye on this guy. I mean, his stats are getting more and more reggy as our hands increase. So we'd definitely be looking to mix in some good, lighter 3-bets against him and also some calls. In the small blind, we're not going to be doing much, especially with an aggressive player left to act, so I would just fold the Queen 10, but we've got him on watch. Okay, looks like you're opening up a little bit, noticing that, well, this guy's been active, but these guys are very tight, so it seems reasonable. On the button, he can have, I don't know if 6-3s are in there, but 6-5 is in there. At least the suited combos. All the ace kings probably play this way. I'm not quite sure about the ace jacks, but those could be there. Ace 3, ace 6, ace queen. Ace 5 might even be in there as well. We got a decent amount of value combos. Your diamond blocker doesn't mean too much because there's an ace on the board, so it's not like he's you're not really blocking many of his bluffs. The 4 does block like some of the nut combos. So let's say ace jack suited at the weakest, and then we'll go ace 5, ace 3, ace 6. Pocket aces in there, not pocket kings, pocket queens. So that's the value. That's a lot of combos of value on the river. Also pocket 6s, pocket 3s. And then we'll say 6-5 suited. I don't even know if 6-5 suited is a thing, because I think we could see some checks on previous streets. Maybe 6-5 of diamonds, but there's a 6-5 of clubs. That's only one combo, so we're not going to worry about it. So now what do we need for value? For bluffs. King Jack, King 10. Hands like these. And we'll say that even like the non of those ones are bluffing because they have the gut shot. So we have that, and then our ace 4. I'm thinking this is going to be a fold, but let's just look at and see what the and then the 6, 3, ace, queen, 5. So we actually, I mean, if he's bluffing with all those, we're actually have kind of a slam dunk call here. With ace high. We gave him 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. And then another 8. So 28 combos of bluffs. So that's kind of for you to decide. You can see, like, if we're at that range, then it's an easy snap call. Let's get rid of these. We're still making a call here on the river. Why do I keep it the wrong one? So let's start getting rid of some combos and see how far we need to go. So now we're at a fold. I keep doing it. So 16 combos of bluffs, and he can have all these combos of value, and we're ending up needing to make a call because of his sizing on the river. So that's kind of up for you to decide. I would tend to think that that number of bluffs seems reasonable for most players, and would probably end up making a call here. So if we also look at a range, like he's betting, let's just make it easy and say this is half pot. I know it's a little bit larger than half pot, but he's betting half pot, which means that he's giving himself 2 to 1, which means that if he's bluffing, he needs 33% folds, which means that we need to be calling with the top 67% of our range that gets here to this river. So what do we have in our range that gets to the river this way that's better than this ace 4? Probably not much. Okay, well, first off, he's betting a little more than half pot, so we can fold a little bit more. So let's say something like 63% of our range needs to call here. So we could have 6, 5 might get here some of the time. We might have slow played. We could definitely have ace 5 here. But I think mostly we're just going to have like some busted draws that got here this way. Maybe some weaker pairs that got here this way. So I think making the ace high call against someone who's trying to apply a nice, balanced bluff range is probably something that we're going to have to do. Did a whole lot of talking. He ended up with Jack 10 offsuit. So I mean, if that hand shows up, holy crap. We just need to have a ton of bluffs. So glad you made the call there. My initial gut was that we were actually going to have much less equity than what I thought. So I'm glad I plugged it in and checked the numbers. I mean, when I checked the numbers, it was just like it seemed like a pretty mandatory call to me. So I'm glad that we ended up checking, and I'm glad that you ended up making the call. Could consider 3-betting the 4s here some of the time. This guy's not super aggressive, so I guess calling is okay. But a lot of the times, let's say this guy had a reshoving stack or was very, very aggressive. I'm not going to be calling here with the pocket 4s all that often. Just check folding here. Gets check, check, and we hit a 4. Going to be betting for sure. Again, we want to think about the sizing that, like, when he checks back on this board, I think a lot of our bluffs are going to want to bet pretty big, even potentially overbet. And I think our hand here is strong enough for an overbet. So for me, this would be a pretty big bet, even though it looks like his range is pretty weak. It's just something that, we want to be matching our value betting size with our bluff betting size, and this is a good opportunity to overbet bluff. He calls, and we get kind of a pooey river. I guess he can have the ace of clubs. Maybe hands like queen jack with like the queen of clubs or something might have checked. Probably not, though. I think that's a standard bet for a lot of people. I would probably just block bet here. I would think block betting is better than going for a check call. Let him hero call with like some of his king X to check back that don't have a club. Some of his 10X, things like that. And when he's betting this small, we're just going to make a hero call here. I don't know how many like really small clubs are in his range, so there's actually not a large amount of flush draw combos, I don't think. But I would have just bet that, like, I think when we get to this river, we can just bet that size ourselves and expect him to call with some of the stuff, and just make sure that we're mixing in, like, obviously flushes that can bet call, and we'll be doing just fine there. This is okay versus two pretty tight blinds versus kind of reggy or even slightly aggressive blinds. I think we could just fold the 9-5 offsuit. Whoa, getting frisky. Man, we really need to have some kind of exploitative read on this guy for 9-5 here to be getting put in the range. We just have so many better raise to 4-bet bluff opportunities. And I don't think we have enough hands on this guy to have like enough of an exploitative read that this needs to be the 4-bet. I get the fact that he's, 3-bet the last couple hands and it seems like he's just being really aggressive. Yeah, I just don't think we need to use 9-5 off. Worked out that time though. It is good to see aggressive plays though, whether or not I think aggressive mistakes, although sometimes they can cost you your, all your chips. I think aggressive mistakes are much better than passive mistakes where you're overcalling in spots where you shouldn't and things like that. So if you're gonna make a mistake, make it be an aggressive one, that's for sure. I think 3-betting this hand some of the time is going to be pretty cool. This guy so far is super tight, so you could actually cold call in the small blind a lot more often. So I'm down with some frequency, like some small frequency 3-bets, and then doing a lot of calling as long as this guy continues to be so tight. But I don't think we need to fold here. This is an interesting spot here with the pocket threes when you've got such a short stack player. And then you've got like a bunch of guys that have you covered. I think we are pretty lucky the fact that this guy is pretty tight, and then both of these guys are going to be out of position from you. So, and you guys are deep enough where they can't just jam very wide range, and it's going to be a little bit tougher for them to play out of position. So certainly we get to open here. I guess if this guy folds, and I would make it something like 3 big blinds with, I think, just about anything in my range that wants to continue here or is willing to try to isolate this guy, just to make sure that this guy isn't getting a good price to play you in position here. Amazingly, this guy folds. And easy 1/3 pot c-bet here. We get check raised, and with threes, I'm pretty comfortable just folding. Easy call here for a min open. Could check raise this board at a little bit. We got 2 overs. We've got backdoor flush draw, backdoor straights that can come in. And I think you're going to have a few more 7s in your range than he is here in the cutoff. So had he bet something like a 3rd pot or some of those size bets, I think I would check raise this one at a pretty high frequency. Goes check, check. If an 8 comes off, we have, pretty good nut blocker. And I think this board is pretty good for our range, so I would be betting here. And not a board where I'm going to have a ton of overbets, I don't think. Maybe if this 6 was a club, we would have more overbets, but since it's not one of the suits on the board, I'm going to just fire out like a 2/3 pot bet or something like that. You go with about half pot, and then he raises. Man, I don't know. I mean, he's like trying to polarize. He's basically saying he'd check back a 7 or turn pocket 6s or, had pocket 4s. Because I don't think that his aces, kings, queens, or checking back and then raising here on this turn. Might be a spot where we could kind of go for the hero bluff here and make it like I don't know, 13.5 or something like that. You don't need to make it huge because you're just basically trying to get all of his bluffs to fold, which I do think there are quite a bit of them. And yeah, we can get away with it with not a huge bet, for sure. So I might consider that. I mean, obviously the easy option is just to fold and be done with the hand here, but I think a guy that's this aggressive could certainly just have some kind of bluffs here. Check back and then bluff when you bet, just expecting you to be bluffing a lot. So sometimes I might go for it. Definitely not going to be the standard play, even if I, was very, very suspicious. I'm only a very small frequency of the time going to re-raise that, but I think that it's worth considering for sure. This guy here, again, is very, very tight, so we do get to call more hands in the small blind and not have to worry about him doing too much to hurt our EV by 3-betting or, making aggressive plays post-flop, things like that. I think he's mostly just going to be folding. So we could call here with the ace-4. This is also an okay hand to 3-bet some of the time, especially against a guy who's opening very aggressively in wide ranges. So I think either option's fine, just as long as we're not folding in this spot. Interesting donk here. So the problem with this is I guess we have king, queen here, queen, jack, queen 10 suited, maybe even queen 10 off, just because, again, this guy's very tight and this guy's pretty wide. But, and some of the weaker, like queen 9 suited, queen 8 suited, I think are in our range as well. But most of those aren't donking, I don't think, unless you, develop some kind of donking strategy here. And I guess you can have 3s and 5s as well. So you do have some strong hands, but again, I don't know if most of those are donking, and I don't know if hardly any of them are going to be donking for this size. So I don't think you're going to get away with this very often. I would, against this guy being so aggressive, and because this guy's so tight, I would probably expect a pretty high frequency of c-bets here on this board, just because he doesn't expect to hardly ever get check raised by this guy. And again, you really don't have much. Like I said, you do have some queen X combos, but you're not really ever just crushing this board, other than the rare sets. You don't have a bunch of 2 pairs, and you don't have a bunch of really strong draws and stuff like that on this board that can check raise pretty aggressively. So this is a reasonable spot for him to c-bet at a pretty high frequency. So this could go into a check raise range. Depending on the bet size, it could go check fold, just because you don't have any of the backdoor. You don't have a flush draw or the backdoor flush draw. If it's really small, you could check call, and then you could see what this guy does, because again, he's going to have somewhat of a reasonable strong, stronger than most big blind calling ranges, and it would be beneficial for you to get some information and kind of see what this guy does. So for the most part, I think with basically everything in my range, I would be checking and kind of seeing what this guy does. And we get the queen on the turn, and I think we're repping a bunch of queens with our bet. And on the flop, that's like basically the majority of our value range if we are donking. So I do think we need to bet again, and I think he's going to have a ton of floats here. The other option would be to go for a check raise. I think that would be kind of cool. The only problem is if like you check and he bets pot, your check raise is forced to be for a very, very large portion of your stack. So it forces you, I mean, it can sometimes put you in a position where you just can't really check raise. But you can bet here and get him to fold all of his floats, I think, pretty efficiently. There's just I think a lot of things in his range that called that just can't continue on this turn. But this sizing just doesn't really accomplish much. It's hard to think that there's worse hands calling for value. I guess there's maybe like 6, 7. Maybe you could even have 4-6 suited. I guess like King Jack of diamonds, King Jack of clubs. As he gets to the turn, maybe the King Highs might call again, but I just expect for him to be calling you a lot here, and then kind of put you in a spot where it's actually going to be reasonable to fire out another bet, and you're going to be kind of unsure of whether or not you should on a lot of rivers. So yeah, now we get kind of a relative blank river for both of you guys. And again, we're just kind of in that ambiguous spot where I think there's a lot of stuff in his range that we can get to fold. By betting, but we're just kind of playing a guessing game with his range. We could also consider check calling, just because if he does have a lot of floats, I don't think he's ever going to be betting weaker pairs here. Doesn't make a ton of sense with your donking range. I don't think he's going to be betting better ace highs here. So we're left with the 6-7 type hands, maybe some of the diamond hands type stuff. So also considering a check call here, I don't think would be out of line as well. But I think we could have definitely avoided this situation by checking the flop and going for some kind of check raise on the turn, or going for a check raise, or looking at the sizing and deciding basically. Or if we did bet the flop, continuing with a larger sizing on the turn that reduces his floats pretty significantly, actually generates a pretty good amount of fold equity for us, and then play it from there. Okay. Easy open, easy call. It's 20 in the pot, you got 35 left. You could just jam here. If I had the ace queen with the queen of diamonds, I guess we could just call and basically plan on picking off his bluffs on the turn. Be pretty thin, but this guy just seems very, very aggressive so far. I think here with the gut shot, the 2 overs, and a flush draw, I'm just mostly going to be jamming here. We do call, and we get the jack. Beautiful turn. Betting. Yeah, I want to bet here. I think we can bet something like 6 or 7 big blinds. It just sets up a nicer jam on the river, and he's, in the last just couple pots we've seen, he seemed to have been either, taking aggressive lines versus your small bets, or floating, doing all kinds of things like that. So I would stick with that kind of small bet sizing you've been using against him, just because it seems to be working. Yeah, but like this size doesn't really ever induce a check raise bluff. It's kind of apparent that we're playing for stacks at this point. All this sizing does is just basically get it in against hands that you're coolering right now. I think if you bet something like 6 or 7, you might actually get some bluffs from this guy. You're going to get a little bit wider range of floats, and then you still do set up stacks for the river. You do get the call. Easy all in on the river. Probably calling here, getting the price. This guy hasn't been all that active though, so it would be a little Still getting, I mean, he's still on the button, and it's still a situation where, like I said, we're getting a very, very good price here. You can see we only need 20% equity to continue, and against the button range, just about any 2 cards is going to have that. But I guess if you're worried about making mistakes, out of position in a pot where your stacks are pretty deep, making some tight folds like that I think is perfectly reasonable. Opening the 3 big blinds with any 2 cards against this guy. He's just been way too tight. Yeah, I just don't have a limping range. I'm just always opening 3 big blinds and just expecting fold after fold after fold and just kind of printing chips against him. I like to check on the flop. Just gonna start betting the turn. I like the small bet. That's good. What a flop. I think we just bet, I don't know, kind of our standard sizing on these kind of board textures. A third pot, so something like 175. It makes it kind of awkward for stacks on the river. You have to bet pretty big on the turn. But that's a reasonable sizing. You could also go something like 2/3 here. I would just kind of do whatever your standard sizing is on a 3 flush board with your value and your bluffs. Awkward turn. I guess we just check back. And probably go for some value here at this point. I think there are some Jack of Spades combos. Probably the King of Spades bets for you at a pretty high frequency. But there are also a lot of, the 6 of Spades, 5, 4, 3, 2, all those that can still call here. And I think you have the best hand often enough and are going to get just called by it often enough that you can go for some value here in the river. He has Ace-9. Yeah, that's also a big part of his range. 3-betting this hand at some frequency against this player. Calling's also okay, though. We're definitely going to continue with it one way or the other. But if you wanted to include this in your 3-bet at, like, half the time, I think that's definitely something reasonable. And pretty okay spot to go for a check raise just because his range is so incredibly wide. We've got a very high equity draw here. And we do have some King X that don't 3-bet that want to check raise. We have King 2, King 6, pocket 2s, pocket 6s, even some 2-6 suiteds if we're calling wide enough. We do check call, so I mean we kind of repped the weaker portions of our range. So some weak ace high floats, 6x hands, 2x hands, maybe things like 3s, 4s, 5s, things like that. So definitely just going to continue checking here on the turn. And against this sizing, if we do want to play for stacks, we're definitely going to have to check raise here. I'm trying to think of what our bluffs would be. I guess if we had Ace-2 with the Ace of Hearts, Ace-6 with the Ace of Hearts, maybe some Jack-10s where one of them's a heart, or yeah, where one of them's a heart. Hands like occasionally some of your 4-5s where one of them's a heart, or your 3-4s where one of them's a heart, that just check call the flop. I think a check raise here. So you actually do have an okay number of bluffs. I guess you could also have like Ace-Jack, Ace-10, all those types of things where one's a heart as well. So, I mean, we could actually, in fact, you know, if you wanted to come up with a bunch of bluffs here that got to the turn, I think you could find quite a few. So I'm definitely cool with check raising here. And against, if it was against this guy, I would probably just go check call, check raise the river. But he hasn't, I mean, he's been active, but he's not like the most aggressive guy. So we run into some problems there. I think here on this river, I mean, this river doesn't really help you all that much. I think he can still have some bluffs, and definitely any of his, you know, ace king, king queen stuff is going to value bet, and then you put them in a decision whether they want to call. I don't know what hands you have in your range that wants to check call, and then donk this river. It would be pretty hard to construct a range for that. So I think we're just going for the check raise. And the nice thing about the check raise is it also protects your, you know, some of your weaker hands when you can actually have some check raises here on the river. You know, your hands like, you know, queen 10 that floated the flop that turned to queen. Well, I guess queen 10 is a bad example. Queen jack. Your ace 6 type hands that got here. Things like that. When you can check raise this hand on the river, I think that protects those a little bit from him just being able to bluff completely recklessly, because he does have to fear some check raises. So I would just go for the check raise here. And he folds. If we didn't check raise the turn, that is. Man, this guy's been so incredibly tight. Probably just trying to get to showdown, realize my equity with my ace and my queen. I guess we could consider betting because we're probably going to be able to get his like pocket 9s, 8s, 6s, like stuff like that to fold. But we can also get in the fold turn and river. And he's going to have, I think, hands like king queen here, king jack. I mean, he's going to have a pretty strong range here. So I mean, we just have a hand that still has some showdown value and can definitely take a free card to improve. So I like to check back. We're just trying to get a showdown here. That seems reasonable against this guy. And the nice thing about, again, really tight guys like this is they're not going to be doing a ton of bluffs and a ton of crazy things. So when you check back, you can, you know, occasionally if he's betting like really small, you'll probably just have to make some calls because there might be a small amount of bluffs. I mean, there's no players that play poker that never bluff. But for the most part, I think you're getting a lot more straightforward reaction from this type of player. So just checking back and trying to get to showdown makes sense a lot more often against those kind of guys. Aces, let's go. Definitely going to c-bet this board. This board is one that I think is quite a bit better for you than for either of these guys. So it's one that you want to bluff at a high frequency. And this guy's shown that he's not really willing to give up to you too often. So I would just stick with it, your third pot c-bet type stuff. And not try to slow play here. Good. I think he's probably continuing again with a lot of the stuff that called on the flop, and he's got a little bit less floats because there's this guy left behind. I don't think he just gets to float with a bunch of random 2 cards, so I don't think we're going to try to slow play here and do check raises against this guy. Had it been heads up, you could consider doing some check raises and things like that, but here we're just going to continue to bet. Goes check, check. You don't have many 6s in your... Well, I don't think he's going to turn a queen into a bluff. And at this point, he's kind of repping like some kind of weak showdown value. A lot of queen X hands, maybe very weak ace X hands. I think if he has a 6 for you and you bet 10 here or anything like that, then he can probably just jam the 6. And maybe there's some slow played flushes as well, but I don't want to go for a small bet here because most of his range is like a Queen X hand, and you want to just try to let him make a big call. So I would fire out probably like 10 or something around that range here, 9 to 10, and just let him figure out if he's going to call or jam with something. Ooh, nailed it. Ace 10, nice. But definitely would have bet the turn there. Definitely would have continued to bet on the turn. Again, raising versus these kind of guys. You're just raising 100%. Any 2 cards, if it gets folded to you, put in the raise and just make them fold. Okay, we get flop a straight. On this kind of board texture, definitely betting. Yeah, and we just expect him to fold a bunch, but he calls, which is nice. Again, given that this guy's pretty straightforward, I don't know, we could block bet and still expect some like ace high calls, but we can also just check and then try to get value on later streets if he checks back. He bets 3, so we're pretty bummed here. Gonna call 1 and then hope that he gives up on the turn. Or we just turn the Miracle Jack. And against this sizing, we have to check raise the turn. We just can't let this sizing, because he's basically saying that he's wanting to get the showdown for a pretty cheap price. And if you just check call, you're kind of left in an awkward spot if you're trying to get stacks in on the river, with a way to do that when you're going to be out of position here. I would not check raise huge against this specific player, because I just don't think there's going to be that many hero calls. But I would certainly be putting in a check raise here. So let's see. He makes it 3 and we make it 8. So that would put another 16 in the pot. So we would have 28. And it would be just a slight overbet jam on the river. Something like that. Maybe even 9 would be good. I would not go to like 12 or 13 or 14 though. A little concerned because this guy that's so aggressive has a shoving stack to, and he's, yeah. I think I would just end up folding this here because of this guy. Seems to be calling more than I would expect. 2 times you vote, 2 times you call. Again, just going for a check line here. He folds. That works. But mostly against this guy, I guess there is merit. We'll talk about like the merit. There is merit in betting for protection. So you could consider making a pretty small block bet. This is probably too big of a sizing. But I think most of the time we can just check and expect him to let us to get to showdown reasonably often. Or something like happened last time where he kind of tells us the strength of his hand with some of his bet sizing, things like that. And we can, even though we're out of position, I think we can still play pretty effectively. So if I am going to bet, though, I think it's going to be quite a bit smaller, just a block bet sizing. Protect my hand a little bit from some of his overcards, which I think there's a lot of just 2 overs in his range. I think if we had a spade here or Queen 8 of hearts, I'm going to be betting this board at a pretty high frequency. I think with this specific one, we're going to check back, and delayed c-bet is going to be a little bit more effective option for us. And so if he checks again here, we're probably going to find some bets now on the turn. And with Queen High, you don't have a ton of showdown value. And with him checking twice, I think he's let us know the strength of his hand. Obviously, there can be some slow plays that are going for check raises, but I definitely think that in general, when you get those 2 checks in a row, the average strength of the hand is definitely weakened. So I would have been looking to delayed c-bet this hand. Check 10 gas. That's a fold. And just c-betting 1/3 on this board versus this guy. Probably a little bit too big. I mean, you block the top pair and some of the draws that can continue as well with the jack. This is a kind of a dry board with the 2 here. I guess if this was like a 5 or a 6, then we could consider betting larger here, but I think it's a fairly dry board. I would just go with a 3rd pot bet and expect him to check raise us at a decent frequency, and then also, you know, float at a pretty high frequency, and we can continue to get value on later streets. But it's also very effective sizing for all of our bluffs as well, because there are just a bunch of things in his range that can't do anything no matter what we do. I'm just going to check back here. And might do the same thing here. I would assume that you would probably slow play all of your jacks that got here. So we can just, if that's your plan, if you're going to be betting all your jacks, then I guess we could, you know, just start firing out 7 high right now and expect some folds. But if your game plan generally is to slow play here, then we want to check back and do a delayed c-bet. We get a 6. Gonna bet for protection value here. Just throw out a big blind and you know, hope to get called by something random. We do still have this guy here. I think if we do have the ace, though, it protects us from, it blocks like a reasonable chunk of his shoving range. So I would be opening any ace X in the spot with this guy being so tight, even with him being at a reshove stack size. So we do open nice, and this guy shows. That's just the easiest fold ever. And I'm gonna min open here. We flop 2nd pair. Same thing. I mean, 1/3 pot c-bets are very, very effective on a lot of different board textures with your whole range, and this is one of them. You could also check back and maybe try to do some bluffs and use this as a bluff catcher. That's fine as well. King turn, it's kind of a bummer. I guess we just check back again and try to get 1 street of value. Yeah, I would just check this back again. I mean, on this turn, you don't need any protection at all, really, from a lot of the things in his range. You could check back and maybe induce some bluffs, or let him hit, you know, a 1-pair hand and let it go check, and you can value bet the river. But I think you're really only getting 1 street of value at this point, and I would be betting maybe some stronger hands for value here, and using this one as a get to the river and a bluff catch. Probably going to open this king 9 here with this guy in the button. I think it's going to, you know, most of your ace X, well, all of your ace X needs to open here, and then I would be like king 8 off, king 8 off or better, and then all my king X suited as well would be opening this spot. Until this guy starts to get really, you know, quite a bit more aggressive. He's definitely opened up a little bit as it's gotten short-handed. You know, maybe that's variance. Maybe he was running bad now and he's just starting, you know, to run normal, or who knows. But we still are under the assumption that this guy's just a very tight player from what we've seen so far. So I would be opening wider here. This must be the final table here. My standard default is to limp with 100% of my range here against at 20 big blinds effective. With 7-9 suited, you could limp call a 3x re-raise, and you can have a bunch of hands that can limp jam. What happens when you make it, you know, 2.75 or 3 is you give this guy a good option to just jam with a very, very wide range over the top of you, and when you limp, you kind of when you limp, him jamming 20 big blinds is not a very good strategy if you're constructing your range well. So as far as like if you're calling pretty aggressively against him. So we open, he calls, block betting the flop. I think actually on ace high boards it's pretty good for us when he doesn't jam, so I'm down with that. Queen of clubs. It's kind of a bummer for us. Well, for our specific hand, for our range, we have a lot of things that are happy to keep betting, but I would start with the check here. We get to see what he does. Almost tempted to just turn my hand into a bluff at this point. You might not need to. Well, you can get some better nines to fold. So you can get, 9-10, 9-jack. King-9. King-9 might have shoved pre-flop, so 9-10 and 9-jack. That don't have a club, you can get those to fold. You can get maybe some ace-x that doesn't have a club to fold, but I think there's very few combos of those, so we're not too worried about that. I don't think there's a ton of queen-x. I'm trying to think if we actually need to bluff here. He does have a pretty good chunk of like just 8x hands. Yeah, I don't know if we need to bluff. I just don't know if he has enough combos of better stuff that we can get to fold here that makes it worth bluffing with the 7-9. If we had like an 8 here, I think considering if we had 7-8, I think considering turning our hand into a bluff might be pretty reasonable. Just trying to get all of his 9x to fold. That's going to be a pretty significant number of combos. We're checking. He checks back. That's beautiful. Yeah, they say that is quite unexpected. But if we knew that he had a bunch of ace-x in his range, then I think we would certainly want to consider bluffing there, trying to get those to fold. They don't have the club. Man, this guy's been tight over the sample. This guy's also been somewhat tight. And he was playing with you guys when you were shorter handed, so he's probably even tighter than this multi-way. If he was just a little bit shorter, you could actually consider calling, because I don't think this guy just gets to jam with a bunch of stuff when you have him covered, and then you could probably fold versus the jam. But when you're putting in this much for a call, and this guy jams here, with the bounties and things that are going to be in effect and the size of the pot, I don't think you'd be able to fold a king-10. So your options are probably just to jam now if you think you can get like hands like ace-jack off to fold and king-queen off, which I think are reasonable at this stack depth. We used that equation earlier in the video to run the math of this, but it gets significantly more complicated when you got all these players left to act. So I don't think that's going to be an effective tool, and we can't really use the calculator to do it. So I would just default to the fact that this guy has been reasonably tight over the sample. You've got 4 players left to act, and he's pretty deep with you to not shove, unless this guy had a huge bounty. If this bounty was incredibly large, and potentially this guy had a pretty large bounty, so sometimes when they both called and you got lucky and could win some very large bounties, then I would go for a jam here. But without knowing the size of this guy's bounty, it's pretty hard to know. That's rough to see right there. All right. Also, but like I said, this guy was pretty tight too, so you're likely up against 2 strong ranges. So unless they had just some enormous bounties, I'm pretty cool to fold. Board that's really good for you. This for me, I would be betting a 3rd pot with my whole range. But if you did want to have some checkbacks in your range, I think this would be a very nice combo for that. And then I like the small c-bet on the turn. Let's just make sure you're checking back some of your air hands and having some delayed c-bet bluffs with that line as well. And I think that's going to be pretty effective for you too. Easy call here. I think we can just try to get the showdown. No need to really turn this one into a bluff. Here, maybe if you had like ace-jack that didn't 3-bet, or ace queen that didn't 3-bet, you could consider betting for value because there's going to be, you know, some weaker ace-x combos that can call. But I think your ace-8's a little bit too weak. I would save this more for like your, you know, 7x hands that are block betting for protection value that can get all the ace-x's to call, stuff like that. He does end up folding, but I think we can just try to get the showdown here with this hand. Maybe even consider calling some small river bets some of the time. I think we can call here sometimes. I mean, we don't know much about this guy, but he's got a, I mean, this is a really good opportunity when you call here for him to go for some jams at his stack size, giving a good squeeze spot. And then you can potentially have this guy reshove to cover the bounty, and then you can build a really, really nice big pot. So this is a rare case where I might just consider calling here. Man, you have so many bounties left to act here. I would almost consider just calling this. I mean, he's made it so large that you're kind of protected from calling and just letting this guy get to cold call with a very, very wide range. But I do think if you call, there are going to be things like, well, I'm trying to think of what's, I guess ace-jack is like the only one that I could think that just might call here that would consider folding if you just jammed at this point. Maybe a hand like ace-10 suited. There might be a couple hands that jam as a bluff that are kind of weak, that are trying to isolate for the bounty. You know, maybe some ace-x suiteds, or, you know, king-queen suited, things like that. And then you've got all these short stacks here that you're pretty cool getting on with. So I think this is a good opportunity to just call here. Most of the time, it's just going to get folded around, and you guys are getting it on flop. But maybe if you can do some light action for some of these guys, that might be pretty nice for you. That's a bummer. I'm gonna call this with king high. I think we'd. Yeah, this is definitely too tight. Like I get some of the earlier folds with the 10-2, and I don't remember what some of the other ones were. But when you have the king high and it's a late position open, and you're short stacked, the reverse implied odds, the shorter the stack, the effective stacks get, the less and less reverse implied odds matter. So, you know, playing for his stack size some of the times when you make a top pair of kings isn't really a bad thing all that often, and you're getting a good price here. I think we do need to call with the king highs. Yeah, if this guy was under the gun or under the gun +1, or even in this spot, you know, any of these three guys, then yeah, we can start folding some of these. But from a cutoff steal position, this needs to get worked into our calling range. This is probably okay at the stack sizes. And this guy hasn't jammed yet, so only a couple hands, but this is a definite shove here for only 10 big blinds with a bounty up for grabs. Let's pull up our handy dandy chart. 10 big blinds, so he's going to be up against this kind of range here. And we'll do everything that's 0.1 or better, so we won't do all the hands. Okay, so we got the ace-4 suited here against the range provided, and you've got about 40% equity versus a slightly tighter than chart shoving range. I guess we'd have to look at his bounties to know, you know, how often we need to call. But if you look at the blinds here, 15,000, 30,000, so he would need like 10 bounties or something like that to 5 bounties would be 10,000 chips, so that would affect it a little bit. 10 bounties would certainly affect it enough where we could definitely get it all in with this. So we would have to look at his bounties. He's definitely going to need, I would say, at least more than 5 bounties for the ace-4 suited to be a jam here to try to go after him, especially when you've got some players left behind. But I guess we're going to have to, that's going to be up to you to look and see how many bounties he has at that choice and do the math there. Nice. This guy's still been pretty tight over the sample. And you got another tight guy here. You could actually make some good arguments for calling. You're getting a really good price, and you've got both guys covered, so you could see the flop, play post flop, and be doing pretty well there. And if this guy jams and this guy jams, you would have to do the math again, look at the bounties, and see things like that. But I would imagine that this is probably a reasonably strong range, and then to reshove with you in the pot would be a pretty strong range as well. So I definitely would be folding though. I think maybe if like one of these two guys, or maybe even these three guys with a 20 big blind stack who are pretty aggressive and are going to be jamming a bunch, maybe we can consider folding, knowing that this guy's range is pretty tight as well. But in this spot, I would have called here. Shoving's fine here with these stack sizes. You get called. Bummer. You can see here we only need 39% equity without any bounties at all, and let's give him a pretty tight range of like 7s plus. I don't know, pretty tight range here. And we're at 41% equity. You add in the bounties, and I mean, we're just having a slam dunk call here. So let's say this guy's, I don't know, we gave him a 12% reshoving range, so let's take it down to I don't know, let's go a little bit tighter here and go to something like this. And you're still right about where you need to be. Again, you factor in the bounties and occasional a couple of these or things like that, which might happen. We're in the calling range at this point when you get to be heads up for a pretty short stack. So I think we definitely need to call with the ace-9 suited here. Ace-9 off would be a pretty easy fold. Even ace-10 offsuit, I think I would be folding. Let's look at the equity difference for ace-10 off here. If I can find the numbers. Yeah, so doing actually slightly worse because of the non-suitedness. So, and then some ace-jack off would be my offsuit cutoff, and ace-9 off would probably be my suited cutoff. So, keep that in mind. Limping is good at these stack sizes. I like that. Could I mean, if you're limping a correct strategy, you're going to be limping, all of your ace X, all of your king X, even your strong hands like that. So you're going to have probably, this is the guy that checked back that didn't jam the ace 8 earlier when you raised, and kind of slow played it on the flop. So maybe he's capable of having more aces and kings than some other players that would just, re-raise here or jam even at 20 big blinds. But even still, I think that your range here has more aces and kings than his does if you're limping all of it. So I do like betting out this size for protection. I think that's pretty good. When he does call, your option is basically to consider turning your hand into a bluff and start betting pretty big, or kind of check and evaluate. I don't think this sizing is going to quite cut it because it doesn't let him know that you're playing for stacks. He can still call with all of his draws that floated. I think can still call here. Certainly an ace or king can call and then be pretty comfortable calling on most rivers because he's likely not going to be playing for his tournament life when you're betting this sizing on the turn. Obviously, if you bet larger, I don't expect his aces or kings to fold. But I think if you do bet larger, when you get to the river, there is some percent chance that you can get, the majority of his kings that get here to fold, and maybe the very weakest of aces. But I really, very rarely expect stack sizes this shallow to fold an ace. But I do expect both of his stronger aces and stronger kings to have raised pre-flop. So we do bet again. We do get the fold. It's interesting. I guess there was some pure floats in his range that floated there, that folded on the turn, which is kind of nice. Again, versus late position open, you can call with almost any two cards. Again, if you want to fold these complete trash, there's not really, you can have some folds here. I think that's perfectly fine. As we're starting to get between like 25 or maybe I will say 30 to 40 big blinds, I actually prefer raising with most of my continuing hands unless this guy's very aggressive. But when he's at that stack size, it's kind of awkward. At 30 big blinds, it's kind of awkward 3-betting because he has to make it really small or else risk committing himself with a lot of kind of the weaker holdings in his range. I guess at 40 big blinds, that's not the case. So maybe, somewhere around like 28 to 30 big blinds, somewhere in that area. And easy value bet here. Easy all in. Feel like you're holding here. Ooh, nice. I'm fine with that. I think that's actually good. I guess this guy can have a lot of one pair hands that checked. I don't know, I would probably still just bet out a reasonable size here and kind of see what these guys do after it goes check on the flop. I expect him to bet most of his things that connect with his board. I guess if he has ace highs, they'll check back and things like that. But those are going to raise most of the time and then pre-flop. So I don't know. I guess if he has like, it's hard to imagine really this guy having much on this board with the no raise pre-flop and then checking back on the flop. I guess this guy can have some things that checked here, but I do think that there's a lot of stuff in his range that just doesn't want to slow play here and just wants to bet. So this is a spot where when we do have the gut shot, I would be, and it got checked around on the flop, I'd be cool to bet out and try to get everyone to fold. Gets checked around again. Man, I don't think you ever have the straight here, so we don't get to overbet. You could get some... Sorry guys, I got distracted. Got a call from my wife, and I don't remember exactly where I was at in this hand. I do know that we talked about wanting to bet the turn. We missed that opportunity. And then I guess I was probably talking about, how many combos of like Queen X and King X and things like that we can get to fold, and maybe even some, 3X that decided not to bet and now got to this river when there's 2 overcards and maybe can fold, things like that. I don't know. With 2 players in the pot, I think we probably missed our opportunity on the turn to really go for a bet here. So I would just continue to give up. So we did have the 3x, we made 2s, we were close. He has to have a lot of bounties for Jack 5 to be a call here for this stack size. So we'll just leave it at that. I'm going to 3-bet here just to isolate this guy for his bounty. I think Ace-Jack is definitely strong enough to do that. And then call the shove here. I don't want to call and just give this guy a free chance to see the flop and, you know, maybe have a chance at getting his bounty. We want to get a heads up, so I would definitely be 3-betting this Ace-Jack here. Not jamming. I don't think we need to jam to accomplish kind of what we want to. Make it something like 6.5 or I would go 7 big blinds here. That's good. You know, something around there. I'm glad that you 3-bet instead of called. That's the key point. I don't know, this guy does have chips and is starting to look more active. But these guys really haven't been doing too much. I think with the Ace-3 here, I would still go for an open. Ace-X is very good at blocking like a lot of the things that they want to reshove in their range. So I think you can just start min-opening all of your Ace-X when at least a couple of the guys after you, even though they're all short stacks, at least if they're not just going crazy with reshoves, I think we can get away with it. Again, still pretty small 3-bets, unless these guys are getting crazy. It seems like this guy's probably mostly 3-bet or folding in his stack size, so I think we can just get away with trying to go for a min-open with a 7-3. I would probably take most of any of my suited 7-3 off, and all those weak, you know, offsuit ones I would just fold. But I guess it doesn't matter too much if we expect him to raise or fold. We can open the non-suited ones as well. But when we have this guy left to act, who's going to call sometimes, it does benefit us to have the suited versions. And the main reason we open only the suited ones is just because it protects our frequencies from getting insanely high and just making it blatantly obvious to anyone at the table that they can just start jamming over us with any 2-card range and be doing okay. We got the King Queen here. And I think this just needs to be put all in. This guy's going to have reasonable, you know, he's been pretty tight, so he's going to definitely have not a bunch of folds, but I do think he's going to have some frequency of min-raise folds at this stack size. And this guy here has jammed a couple times and was playing a little bit aggressive when he had a deeper stack. And you guys are getting short-handed, so ranges are going to start to get wider and wider, even though these stats kind of seem pretty tight. I do think people widen up, and especially as stacks are getting shorter. I think this just has to be a shove here with the King-Queen. I guess the only time I would consider not shoving the King-Queen is if both of these guys still had a min bounty. But I'm assuming that one, if not both of these, have several bounties at this point in the tournament. When you're at the final table, you're nearing the end of the tournament. I think this hand is just would be too strong to ever consider folding. Obviously, if he jammed, then yeah, it's snap fold. But we ended up folding there. I think that's a little bit too tight. We won't show the results. Just kidding. Some people might want to know. I won't leave you guys hanging. So he's jacking 10s. I mean, definitely hands that we expect in their range. It doesn't really tell us much. If he's got a pretty significant bounty, we might as well just try to get it all in with him. I would go for a min open. These guys haven't. I mean, they're getting more active as we can see as stats get larger, but I don't really think anyone at this table has been going crazy, and we have a pretty darn short stack here. So again, if it's a min bounty or just a couple bounties, not really worth it. But if he's sitting on like, 8, 9, 10 plus bounties, then let's try to play for the short stacks chips. But obviously, the more aggressive these guys get, the less we're going to be able to try to do that. Easy, just check back with the Jack-9. Flop a pair, easy call. Pretty easy call on the turn as well. Probably have to call some rivers. You block the straight. There are definitely there's definitely bluffs here. I mean, draws that miss, 10x that wants to bluff, random stuff. He checks, so that makes it very easy for us. I guess had he ripped in like 8 big blinds or something, we could consider folding, but I think a lot of times blind versus blind, our hand is pretty strong for this situation in a limp pot, and there's just going to be quite a bit of bluff, so it'd be pretty hard to get me to fold here. Especially when he's checking top pair here. Maybe, I mean, yeah. That just makes his range all the weaker when he's betting and he doesn't have some top pair combos in his value bet range on the river. Considering donking a little bit on this board. I don't know. We could go for a check shove, or we could develop some donking ranges here on this board texture. It just depends on how often you think we're going to get a c-bet out of this guy. You can see the c-bet number here at 25%. That's a pretty low c-bet, but we don't have many hands. Like these post-flop stats aren't really all that significant at this hand frequency, so I wouldn't really be looking at that, but I would just have to use your judgment of like based on everything you've seen throughout the tournament and go from there. Basically, the more he's c-betting, the more we want to check raise. The less he's c-betting, the more we want to develop a donking range here. Goes check, check. We hit our 7. And the reason we want to develop a donking range and 7-8 would be our bluff is because if he's not betting at a high frequency but might call, we want to be betting our 6s and 4s for protection. We want to be betting 10s for protection. We want to be sometimes betting our 2 pairs and stuff like that as well. So we want to be trying to get value on the flop if he's not going to be c-betting for us. And this is just like a really good bluff combo to mix in there. So good bet on the turn when it goes check, check. That's reasonable as well. This guy's getting kind of a reshove stack. I wouldn't be calling with a 10-4 suited. If these guys were, like let's say they were both 30-ish big blinds, you might want to consider making some loose calls here in position against the guy that's second in chips just because of the ICM pressure. You can make a lot of plays post-flop and you guys are deep enough where you're going to have some playability. But when he's this short and your stack sizes are still pretty close, I mean, he can obviously, if you're getting too crazy, he can definitely put a big chunk, big dent in your chip stack. And bounty builders, making sure you're maintaining the chip lead is very, very important at this stage of the tournament. Probably just check raising with the queen 10 here. There's a lot of stuff that he can continue to call with. Our hand is very strong for the situation. Button opening range. We've got top pair. I am certainly down to check raise. We check call and get kind of an awkward turn. I think now we're kind of stuck in a check call type line. Goes check check. Given that there was a heart on the turn, I think it's actually probably better to go for a block bet sizing. And rep like some of your weaker jacks, your 6x type hands, maybe some other pairs that might want to bet that way. If this was not a heart, we might want to go for an overbet here on the river and just rep, a ton of misdraws like king 10, whatever draws you would have and a bunch of other bluffs. But when the heart's on the turn, I think we want to go for block bet, maybe do some bluffs and call as well. So I like that sizing. That's pretty good. Again, without anyone being really crazy, I would be opening this 9-8 suited for the min. We haven't really seen this guy reshoving his stack size very often yet. Looks like he picked up a guy. Oh, he doubled up. Just gonna fold Jack 9 here. Probably just checking back here on the 9-8-9. I mean, the ranges are very, very, very wide here. You have a ton of 9s. as well as him, so he can't just check raise like crazy. So if you did want to just c-bet a third pot with your whole range, I think that's perfectly fine as well. But I would develop some kind of check back range. Plan on calling down. He's betting 4. Gonna call here. We folded. I don't know. I think your hand is pretty darn strong still for the situation, and you know, you're playing 3-handed, blind versus button calling range. I'm not quite ready to give up there, and you still have equity against, even if he's betting an 8 or a 6 or pocket 7s or pocket 5s, you know, things like that on the turn. I mean, you still have equity left, so I wouldn't be quite ready to fold on the turn yet. I think we can check back this some of the time for sure. Just gonna have to call now. And I think we can fold the ace 4 here. Unless we think he's like for some reason going to be checking like ace queen and ace king and then value betting this way on the river, which I don't really think anyone's going to be doing. After the 10 comes on the turn, I mean, you have a ton of 10s in your check back range. I would probably just fold here. And one thing to consider is I just don't think that many players, even probably myself in a lot of spots, have enough bluffs when we're overbetting to really make people want to really make you want to hero call in a bunch of spots. And this is, or you don't even have to say hero call, just bluff catch. I mean, you could literally just fold your bluff catchers and in most of the times when you're facing an overbet, and probably be doing pretty good that way until you get some read on a player that he's either a very strong regular or like a maniac type player. That doesn't mean always fold your bluff catchers, because there's going to be times when you're going to have a, you know, slightly better read, or the overbet just doesn't really make sense. You know, there's those kinds of outliers that happen, but I think in this spot I would have been pretty happy to fold the ace 4 here. Reasonable just open shove here versus this guy. Gonna min open here. I think we are folding a little bit too tight on the button. Easy fold. Easy fold. I like the min open here. I guess you do have the problem with some ICM pressure here with this guy being short, and this guy, like, again, we've been talking about this final table over and over, not super aggressive, so I'm fine with folding the queen jack offsuit here, given how given those conditions. Queen jack suited, I think we're certainly going to be at least calling. When he makes a 4 big blinds here, I would just jam. I think it looks to me like he's just trying to apply pressure to you ICM wise because of this guy. You don't want to call here and give him a chance to realize the equity with whatever wide range he has, or put you in a, you know, spot where you're folding at a too high of a frequency post flop. I think the other thing is because he's opening for 4 big blinds, the amount of folds that you need is going to be less because the pot's already bigger. So I think I'm totally fine with jamming the ace 10 here. Do jam, I like that. How do you open like min or something like that? I think we can just call it our stack size and play a pot in position. But easy shove. I'm fine with the 2-5 suited fold. We can fold the 6-4 here. Interesting. I mean, we're at the very bottom of our range type hands, so I guess with this guy getting shorter and shorter, we can just fold the king 3 and not try to jam or do anything fancy here. I'd min open this for sure. I guess you're worried about him 3-betting you at a pretty high frequency. I think you can still put in the min open. If you're really worried about a ton of 3-bets, then you could just consider limping the button. But when you have the ace high 3-handed, I think it's a little bit too strong to just open fold here. We get the limp and easy fold. That's fine. That's okay. Gonna be calling here. Check fold. That's fine. Here we go. Oh man. Easy shove. Nice. Probably limping here. He's deep enough here. I think we're just going to want to just start limping our whole range. I like that. Very good. And it looks like as you got 3-handed, both these guys have picked up their aggression frequency as you should. You could go for some check raises on this board. You could just bet out yourself. I mean, I think both options are going to be reasonable. Wow. I guess he did check back like the king 3-handed that one time when it was 2s. You had the jack 7 or jack 8 and he had the king 3 and didn't bet a pair, so there's still a chance that he has some 5x and some reasonable hands that can call here. I think our opportunity to get bluffs got reduced pretty drastically when he just checked back the flop, so I would just be betting myself. And yeah, just going to throw out a big blind here and hope he can call with something. Maybe induce a raise. I guess you can fold the 7-6 off. 7-6 suited I would be calling in position here, even though he's making it 4 big blinds, but you can fold the offsuit version. Again, with this guy being so short as well. Okay, that's fine. I would min open the queen 2 suited for sure. Or again, if you're worried about him 3-betting you and applying the ICM pressure, then, you know, limp and let him make it 4, and then you can call and, you know, see the flop that way. Just checking back here. I'm going to call 1 with the ace high. Definitely when we have position and ranges are pretty wide. I mean, maybe going through your mind that he's been making 3 and 4 on you, and so he's kind of trying to trap, and you know, that's probably what's going through your mind here. But I think that there's also just a as reasonable a chance that he limped with some really weak things and just was trying to see a flop for cheap, and your ace high is going to be doing well against those. And, you know, again, you do have position when you call here. You can't just barrel relentlessly once you call in this kind of a board texture, so you'll get some good information by the turn. Easy fold, I like that. Again, I mean, try to find some opens on the button. You haven't even really tested this guy out to see if he's going to be 3-betting you and jamming on you very aggressively, because we've just folded all the buttons pretty much since it's been 3-handed. So, I mean, yeah, he's been aggressive with you when it's small blind versus big blind, but we don't really have like a definitive answer if he's just going to be going crazy on you when you open the button. So give it a chance. I think we got a call here. So let's use our handy dandy chart. We'll just say 9 big blinds. Button shoves. We're in the big blind. So you can see queen 7 off is a slightly negative shove. But my guess is that we have a ton of bounties in play here, which is going to tilt it towards a plus EV call. Again, I guess if he's got, you know, a very insignificant amount of bounties, then, or he's going to be, so this calling range, again, is based on this shoving range. So if you think he's going to be significantly tighter than this, then we can also fold. So that's, I guess, up to your judgment. So I probably misspoke saying, yeah, we have to call without, you know, knowing the bounties and in this situation, but likely he's going to have just enough bounties where it's going to tilt this towards a call. Would consider calling here. I think he's opening like 100% of the buttons, it feels like, by this point, and this guy just hasn't really been putting in his chips hardly at all. So, and he doesn't have like a ton of incentive to do so with a very wide range because this guy's never ever folding. So I think we could consider calling that there. Gonna end up folding the 5-10 suited here with this guy being so short. I think he just gets to jam on you now, make you fold a bunch. So just gonna call here. You're a little bit deeper than last time. You had 24 big blinds when I was saying jam with the ace 10 here. At 33 big blinds, let's just call and play pot in position. Pretty easy call here. Again, this guy's going to be doing this with a wide range. I think our ace high is good often. We've got some backdoor straights that can come in as well. Yeah, we're just folding a little bit too tight here. I'm fine with just folding the offsuit version. That's fine. Easy call. Easy check fold. That's okay, folding your weakest king X offsuit. Yeah, I mean, let's give it a try. There we go. We got 10 high there. If he calls, we can just give up. But I think we're going to get some folds. But that just goes to show you, like the last time when he had ace X, he did bet the flop, but it was still a board texture where he's not going to hit very strong with a bunch of hands. But when he just check folds on that board, it shows that he's got stuff in his hands that's weak when he's limping there. You know, he's not just trying to trap you with the nuts and things like that. So keep that in mind. Gonna be calling. A little bit too tight here to fold versus a min open. Wow, this guy made an epic comeback. We can fold here. If we had this guy covered, we could consider jamming this at some frequency just because he's been so aggressive on the button. But without him having him covered, I think we can just find folds here with the at 20 big blinds effective. I'm guessing he folded. I didn't check. You did jam and he folded. Okay. I mean, there's not a huge difference between having him covered and not having him covered, but it does make it better when you have more chips in him. I think this is still going to be okay at, you know, some small frequency to do. See bet this board with third pot on my whole range. Gonna be probably just jamming this turn. I think there's weaker ace-x that could be doing this. There's just definitely draws that you want to, you know, charge to continue. You don't want to just let them see the river for the 4 big blinds. You want to reduce their EV by jamming. I mean, it would make more sense for his 2 pairs and things to want to go for a check raise, but maybe sometimes he's betting 2 pairs. But I think for the most part, you just have a hand that's way too strong for your stack sizes and situations to ever do anything but just jam here. Looks like we took a kind of a slow play line to call down. And he did turn the 2 pair, which is interesting. But I mean, if you do call the turn, I'm definitely never folding the river. So that's just got cooler there, because I would have jammed the turn. We can actually just call here and fold on some flops where we just like a king ace flop or something we could fold, you know, type stuff. It's actually there's a video on Run It Once done by Steve Paul talking about, it's calling in heads up pots versus min opens, and even at actually at very short stack sizes like this, it increases your EV even more to basically let yourself continue in a tournament to see one more hand when you have like 1 or 2 big blinds left. You increase your EV very substantially by just calling here and making a decision on the flop. It's not going to be as much when you're multi-handed, just because the EV of a hand like this goes down quite a bit, but I think we could just call here and on some flops find some folds. Like here, when we had an overcard and a backdoor straight draw, probably wouldn't be able to fold this board. But there's a couple boards where we would end up finding a fold. So anyways, that is the tournament. Good game, Mattis. Nice deep run, man. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this review. I know I didn't end up doing a pile solver. I said I would. What I basically decided midway through without saying anything to you guys is that basically we'll probably let you guys that watch the video, or even Mattis who's watching the video, if you want a pile review video done separately, if we get a couple votes on a hand and it seems like there's a hand that has some interest in the comments below, then I will do that hand and make a secondary video with a pile solver analysis, or maybe even 2 hands depending on how much interest there is. So that's the plan for that one. But anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching the video, and we'll see you next time.